Okay, it's now 5:30, and we will have Tepo Komani do the opening and welcome for us.
Okay, thank you, Buitumelo. Just to check again, can you still hear me?
Yes, everything is okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, welcome, everyone. I hope that you are all as excited as I am. We've been waiting for so long for this. We've always wanted to have this engagement just to, get to bounce around our ideas and also have this very important discussion on the topic that we have chosen, the relevance of emancipation. So I'm just here to just welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for taking your time as well to be here so that you can have this engagement with us. So with us today, we have a few people. So we have panelists with us, and we also have our host, of which I'm gonna introduce in the minute. But just so before we do that, I would like to note down a few rules that all of us should actually adhere to. So the first one, I would like to say that can we please just ensure that you only turn on your mic if it's your turn to speak, and please be respectful in a way you ask questions. Okay, and be mindful of the background noise as well if your mic is turned on. And let's just respect each other's opinions, and I believe that we are actually going to have a fruitful engagement. So yeah, now I'm just gonna ask that can Bitumelo please play a short clip for us before we begin and before I also introduce our host. Thank you.
In a minute. So this clip is just to give a background on who ABASA Wits is and what the purpose of this engagement is all about. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you, Tepo.
Thank you so much, Witumelo. So yes, as I've mentioned, that we have panelists with us, and also one important thing that I want to say before we actually start is that in as much as we are going to have this engagement or discussion, let's just be cognizant as well that it's not just going to end here. We're not only going to talk about it, it's not just a conversation, okay? Given that this is something that affects all of us as a society, and these are some of the things that we come across every day. So it's important that we take everything that we are going to learn today here and ensure that we take it forward. It doesn't just end here, so that it can actually have an impact in society. So without wasting any time, I would like to introduce our host, Mr. Khaya Sithole. I believe he's here. If you can hear me. Yes. So assuming that you'll be introducing all our speakers, or maybe our speakers will be afforded an opportunity to say something. Thank you.
Hello, 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 and good evening to everyone. I see some smiles, so I'm going to take a gamble and assume that you're all smiling because you are seeing my handsome face on your screens. And if you're smiling for any other reasons, I'm going to ignore you and I will not allow you to participate any further. So anyone who's smiling is only smiling because of how handsome I am. I mean, thank you very much for the opportunity to obviously participate in this conversation. And the wonderful thing about it is that when I saw the topic, the first thing I said was, thank God I'm not the one that has to answer the questions. I get to ask the questions because I think the nature of the engagement we're going to have is quite important and quite delicate in that it really just taps into some issues that remain topical even to this day. And of course, coincidences tend to happen when you least expect them. And today just happens to be the day where I received a report from the BEE Commission, 99 pages of it. The first 7 pages are very good graphics, and then the rest is very sobering as a reality. And this is a type of report that has been commissioned to ask the question of what is the status of the various transformation initiatives that we have in the country. So whether you look at BEE legislation, for example, or any other transformation initiatives, you write the laws, you implement them, but do they actually have any effect? So that report actually left me with a lot of burning and interesting questions that unfortunately some of you today are going to have to engage in, even if you haven't seen the 99-page report. So I apologize for that, but that's the price you pay for deciding to come and hang out with my handsome face on a Wednesday evening. With the preliminaries being done, I'd like to say thank you to everyone. And please, in spite of the fact that every day we see it happening in Parliament, on TV, on everywhere else, there are still people who do not believe that the first thing you must do in any Zoom meeting is to simply be invisible. So you mute yourself, regardless of how passionate you may feel about the topic, regardless of how excited you are to see my wonderful face, please mute yourself. And I think the reason that becomes important is that you are listening in, but there are people in your home and your cat and your dog who aren't aware of what's happening, and then they're going to come in and they're going to intrude, and then suddenly everybody is going to feel a bit disrupted. So regardless of your persuasion, regardless of how excited you are, please mute yourself. There will be an opportunity later on for everybody to engage, in which case you'll then be able to present your views and just tell us what it is that you're feeling. So that's the first thing, that you must mute yourself. The second thing is that even though this is a pro bono organization and they're technically not paying me in cash, I'm the only person who's actually on the payroll for this particular exercise, which means mine is the only face that gets paid for being here. And the reality is that if you want to be seen, this is not the platform. So again, do not activate your video in the middle of it all, because guys, anyone that's getting paid for presenting a face here, and my speakers also. So please just bear with us. Do not present your face randomly. We've seen some instances where suddenly there's a very nice looking face, but people do not know why the face is there. So do not activate your video under any circumstances. The only opportunity you'll have to really engage is through the voice, our conversation. That's really the main issue. But we've also learned over time that when everybody is on video, it tends to then create pressures on other people's, infrastructure, software infrastructure, and then they start complaining that they can't hear us. So please, the videos are not a necessity. Our voices are beautiful enough. Our sounds are going to be very amplified. So that is fine for now. So just to start, ABASA is turning 35. I hope all of you are aware of this. ABASA is turning 35 in a couple of weeks' time, and it's obviously quite important to remind everyone on the call of the question that I always ask organizations like ABASA and any other organization to say, what exactly is your roadmap? What is your plan towards achieving the type of objectives that you set yourself out to be? So I've been fortunate enough to have been part of ABASA for quite a while, so I'm at least aware of the objectives. But again, we have someone here who is from the executive committee of ABASA, who has the responsibility of re-articulating what those objectives are. So later on, Luyanda, I'm already warning you in advance that you're going to have to deal with that question. And I think for me, I suppose the reason I even agreed to participate in this is I always get intrigued and excited by when advocacy and transformational organizations decide to have a conversation. Because of course, the reason they still exist is there is a burning question that we seek to resolve. Now, whether that question is 35 years old or 5 years old, it is still there in one form or another. And I think the reason I mentioned the latest BE Commission report that came out today, or at least the version that I saw today, for example, is of course, it reinforces the fact that the issues that people are talking about in 1985 are still the issues people are dealing with in 2020. And the overriding question is, how can it be that 35 years later, the conversations are still the same? It may well be that the answer is that, well, actually, for the first 10 years of ABASA's existence, for example, we're living in a different, political regime altogether. So perhaps we should not look at it as a 35-year question, but perhaps a question of 24 or 25 or even 26 years. That's what we get the chance to articulate in the various platforms that we have. So this is really what, for me, was quite intriguing. And I think also the way ABASA framed the topic was quite interesting to me, in that we talk about the relevance of emancipation. And of course, that is a pregnant statement itself, in that it firstly sits to put together the proposition that there has been some form of emancipation. Now, when we do talk about emancipation, we then have to be able to crystallize exactly what it is that we're saying. I'll give you an example. If you know someone who has grown up, gone to school and never made it anywhere else, does that person have the same understanding of emancipation that you might have? If you are talking to someone who went through to university, qualified as an actuary and is now serving as an actuary and having a wonderful life, is that emancipation is defined? You could be talking about a person who's got all the skills, who's got all the qualifications, but find themselves stuck in the workplace because they're not recognized as a person who's there on merit. They get labeled as the quota employee, and of course, for them, those have multiple effects and dimensions. Is that emancipation is defined? Never mind though, those are the questions that my panelists are going to have to engage in. So I'm going to start off, we're going to do it a bit differently, in that every panelist will introduce themselves and then immediately tell us exactly what on earth is emancipation in their own words, because I think that would enable us to at least have a baseline understanding of what everyone thinks the issue is, and then we're going to go into the various dynamics of it. Now, of course, the one thing that you must always watch out for when you speak like me is that some people might want to sue you. People get, excited and pissed off. So I'm always excited when there's a lawyer in the room, because I can legal representation. So in this case, our first panelist is someone who's happy, who's going to defend all of us if something goes wrong in this conversation. I'm not encouraging wrongdoing, but sometimes, things happen. So if this turns out to be the case, we've got Melene Rossouw, who's actually an attorney. And the most exciting thing about Melene's profile for me was her involvement with, constitutional institutions. So she worked at the Constitutional Court, which is the important thing. And the one thing that I always used to tell people when I lived in Braamfontein is that the saddest thing about being an accountant is that you do not have the license to walk straight into the Constitutional Court and say, can I do articles here? You end up doing articles involving spreadsheets and all these auditing things, which is really not as exciting as being a lawyer. So she did that. And then also she worked particularly with institutions that deal with issues that are very close to my heart. And these are institutions that focus on socio-economic rights. And I think for me, the idea of emancipation in South Africa is incomplete without us focusing on the rights of the people who probably don't have as much access to economic and social capital as we do. So we're going to deal with that. But hey, our first panelist, Melene Rossouw, welcome.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole. I'm going to call you Mr. Sithole because I'm a huge follower of your work and I have a lot of respect for you. Thank you very much to the ABASA Wits leadership also for inviting me. I know that we were supposed to have had this gathering in person at Wits University, but obviously because of COVID, etc. But thanks a lot for the introduction, Chairperson, and I also hope that somewhere in this discussion, besides the BE policies, which I can only, but hope that I'll have an opinion on, we'll talk a little bit about women emancipation as well, and sort of the socio-economic emancipation of our people, because I think that is predominantly where my strengths lie. But on the question of emancipation, it's such a broad topic and it's such a relevant topic to have at this stage. And so obviously what any normal person, lawyer would do is go to the Oxford Dictionary to go and find out exactly what emancipation would mean in that frame. And so the definition that I got is that it is a process of being free or liberated socially, politically, and economically. But there was one component, and I think we have to deal with this, that they left out, and that is the mental emancipation of the Black person. I'm going to talk about Black people because that is the brief that France gave, because we're talking about our people and we're talking about the emancipation of Black people. Because I genuinely believe in South Africa today, besides the fact that there are opportunities and the fact that we have rights within the Constitution that we'll also talk about later, I am not sure whether or not our people are grasping these rights that are currently available to us, or these opportunities that are available to us, because of the fact that we have mental slavery, that we are not emancipated in terms of our minds and how we see things. And the first analogy sort of that came to mind was that of a bird in a cage. And this bird has been in the cage for a very long time. And that is the only frame of reference that it knows. But then the cage doors open and the bird is now allowed to fly out. There's an opportunity for freedom. There's an opportunity to recreate yourself, to solidify yourself in a world outside of this cage. But the bird doesn't fly. And that is where I see South Africans, predominantly young people, stuck today. I want to specifically address the statement, profound statement. I don't know if Frans came up with that statement, but he says that, is it a being with lack of resources? Is it an oppressed being? Or are we not emancipated because we are Black? And my answer is that it's all three. The fact is, Black people in South Africa are still deprived of the resources to be able to be fully emancipated. But can we at this moment argue that those resources still lies with the white monopoly capital or the white minorities in South Africa? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that there are some of our Black brothers and sisters who are emancipated and are sitting with the resources, but those resources they have not exposed to the rest of us. That is my proposition on that point. An oppressed mind. That goes back to what I've said about the fact that we have been living in a cage, that we have been oppressed, whether through apartheid laws, whether through hundreds of years of colonization. Now we're in a democracy and we still have an oppressed mind. We still do not understand what the true meaning of freedom, what it feels like and how it should look like. And then the other one, or is it only because I'm Black? I would say yes. The systems that we had in apartheid, the practices that we had during colonization, and even during democracy still exists. Perhaps not to a larger extent than what it used to be, but it's still there. The system still oppresses Black people. And my question that I would like to leave perhaps is what is the young people, what do the young people want to do to sort of break down those systems that keep Black people oppressed even within a constitutional democracy? That's what I want to say on that, Khaya.
Thank you very much for that initial input, Melene. I mean, we're definitely going to dig deeper into some of the issues that you raised them, but this is one of those awkward moments where I'm like panicking and shaking in my chair, because obviously, you know, when sometimes you have to introduce a person and you're like, oh my God, I'm actually doing this, you may get overwhelmed sometimes. So this is about to happen to me, because obviously Sihle Bolani, for a lot of people who might not know her history, Sihle is a person who's got very diverse skills. Sihle has a lot of things. Sihle has written books about the types of things that some of us speak about in our corners, and we hope that someone is listening. She is one person who's got a very, very good story to tell, and this is a story that's even been converted into a book. And the book itself says, "We are the ones that we need. The War on Black Professionals in Corporate South Africa." It's a very, very important piece of contribution into the South African discourse, particularly post-1994. And of course, in a conversation like this one of today, when we're talking about the relevance of emancipation, having Sihle Bolani was obviously a natural, answer for the ABASA team. And Sihle, where are you? Because I want to ask you a very difficult question. I don't see Sihle on my screen. She was here earlier. Oh, Sihle, are you trying to be invisible? It's not going to work now. Now, welcome, Sihle. I mean, yeah, you've done a lot of work in this. You've been in and out of corporate South Africa. You've been through some dark times. There's some people who have insights into your life story, and your book will be able to tell us. Now, again, we need to set the baseline first of all. We said here the relevance of emancipation. I'd like to put it to you. Has such a thing even happened?
Yeah, so, you know, when, firstly, thank you so much to the ABASA team for having me participate. You know, when I saw this topic, I thought to myself, yo, where do you even begin tackling this elephant? Because I think for me, I don't believe that the question is about whether or not emancipation is relevant. Because we know without a doubt that there is a need for economic freedom and meaningful economic participation for Black people and Black women in particular. We know without a doubt that there is a need for freedom that is enabled by an efficient, effective, and sound justice system, right? A freedom that would enable women, children, members of the LGBTQIA community to feel safe in their homes and on their streets and in parking lots. We know without a doubt that there is a need for the freedom that comes as a result of psychological safety, particularly in the context of the workplace, considering the experiences of Black professionals around discrimination in the workplace, pay inequality, sexism, racism, homophobia, and of course, you know, the stomach politics, you know, when we speak about executive complicity within the workplace. What is not clear for me is how badly we want this freedom, because that will ultimately determine what we're willing to sacrifice in order to achieve it, and how far we're willing to go to fight inequality, even if it doesn't appear to impact on us directly. You know, Melene mentioned, you know, something about there are some Black people who are emancipated, but they are not sharing the access to the resources that they have. And that's a big issue, you know, so if you are free, but other people are not free, then that's not emancipation. It can't be about one small group of people. It's got to be about the bigger picture, but what does the bigger picture look like? And, you know, this is something that I even cover in my book, my concern around the fact that we don't have a collective fight, a collective mission as Black people in the workplace and broader societal issues, you know. And so I think that this is a very important conversation because we all know that these inequalities exist. We all understand the impact of inequality in our personal capacities. But what about the collective? That for me is a gap that's missing.
Sihle, thank you very much for those initial insights. And, you know, you've left a couple of important statements there that unfortunately I'm going to have to come and challenge you on them. And I think for me, this question of the collective mission or the collective fight is something that is quite key, because I think it's probably going to be our best chance of actually getting any meaningful change, rather than having people like you, perhaps, or even Bonga Magani, whose story you probably know, being the Lone Rangers trying to fight a system that simply just moves on and tells the story of the next person. So that is something that is quite key. Now, a couple of years ago, when I was much younger and long before the coronavirus thing happened, I was at a cricket stadium. Now, a lot of you who know me know very well that I could never play cricket. I'm far too useless to do that. But what was happening on that day at a cricket stadium is that we were listening to a lecture. And this was a lecture that was delivered by Mr. Barack Obama. Now, of course, Barack Obama, big lecture, it was a big moment. But perhaps nothing was more exciting and more extraordinary about the day than the identity of the person who was actually running that entire event. The MC of that Obama lecture, or the Nelson Mandela lecture delivered by Barack Obama in 2018, was a good friend of mine, Busisiwe Mkhumbuzi. I remember the dress. The dress was wonderful, but the way she ran the event was even better. Busisiwe, good evening, and I can't help the fact that I had to tell people that I'm a friend of yours. I mean, we get just Barack Obama, so shoot me, but that's what I do. Name dropping is my game. But here we are. We are talking about this key question of just the concept of emancipation and, of course, its relevance. And our audience here is made up of young people that are transitioning from the world of school, the world of university, and eventually into the world of work. And, of course, for them, They might not even be aware of the type of challenges that we've seen in this environment and really the lessons that we've shared before. So again, just like everybody else, just to establish the baseline, in your understanding, what is this emancipation that we seek?
Oh, Khaya, I thought you were going to tell us a very interesting story about yourself, and then suddenly you bring me into it.
I'm the invisible one today.
Hi to everyone, and hi to the ABASA team. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm just really glad to be here and talking to students, as well as a warm hi to all the panelists. I look up to all of you, and I'm just really honored to be on this panel. Khaya, for me, I think that whenever we talk about political and economic emancipation strategies, then we have to look at what influences the kind of strategies that we believe about emancipation or that we enact in society. And I think that takes us to the moral issues. I think the big issue that we don't give enough weight to, that really is what influences what we're going to believe, is that moral premise. And in a context like ours, which is a liberal context, then you might turn to, for example, Robert Nozick and his theory of justice that gives us this criteria for adjudicating what under what conditions can we redistribute income and wealth. And he says essentially that anyone who has acquired income and wealth is entitled to it depending on how they have acquired that. And it gives two criteria from which we can justly redistribute that income and wealth. And the first one is that there has to have been an initial acquisition of that income and wealth that is just. So it couldn't have been taking someone's land from them. It couldn't have been an unjust trade that resulted in me having that income and that wealth. And secondly, the market conditions under which we operate themselves also have to have allowed everyone to participate equally. And so when those two criteria, or one of the two, are violated, then we have a moral case for the redistribution of income and wealth. So we certainly have one in a South African context. And I think to a large extent, 1990 to 1994 was a period of putting in place political and economic strategies to do that. And I think we've done that on a continuous basis. But time and again, we need to go back and look at the conviction, that moral conviction, and if whether or not the strategies we're putting into place are underpinned by that. But I think there are two big issues that affect the realization of that redistribution of income and wealth. And those two issues, in my opinion, is equity and efficacy. By equity, I'm talking about the impartial distribution of the wealth and the income that's being redistributed. So in our country, we've got a classic case of money kind of being trapped in an elite belt by people who have essentially decided that they were the only oppressed group in this country for years, when that's certainly not the case. And so you have masses who are living in a very poor country, but at the top, you've got these policies that, theoretically say that income and wealth should be redistributed in a specific kind of way. So you've got that equity issue. And then you've got an efficacy issue, which really speaks to the issue of, do the policies result in the intended benefits that we are trying to create? And they don't, mostly in South Africa. And that's why you have issues like tokenization, you've got fronting, you've got people favoring, for instance, diversity and not inclusion. So all of those issues stem from that efficacy issue. But more importantly, then you've got people kind of assuming that just because you've got political emancipation, that means you also are emancipated as a person. And we have to get into that debate about emancipation as a condition of being. And so it's layered. But I think for me, there's a moral argument, and then we have to look at the equity and efficacy of the strategies. And then finally, we have to look at our condition as people.
All right, thank you very much, Busi. And I think, that line that you just put there, emancipation as a condition of being, we're definitely going to have to revisit that, because I think it's quite a very important way of really just framing this conversation around exactly what it is that we seek to pursue. Now, a lot of you tend to forget that, you know, we were once young, and when we were young, we all wanted to be accountants, and, you know, later on life showed us that, you know, spreadsheets are probably not the way to go, but until you start doing the spreadsheets yourself, it's the way to go. So our next panelist is actually an accounting science student who's still going through the journey, an exciting journey. I remember university was far more interesting than articles, because at university, you get to chill and have ABASA conversations. At work, you get to do the work. So this is a wonderful opportunity. Our panelist is Noluthando Jiyane, who is actually a student, a second-year student at Wits University, and she's joining us here to represent the voice of the younger people, because we all think we're young, but there's always the younger people. Noluthando, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole. Am I allowed to switch on my video?
Yes, you may. Yes, you may. Yeah, we're getting there.
Okay, thank you so much.
But remember, you are like on my good list, so you get to switch on your video unlike everybody else. So, Noluthando, I mean, obviously for a lot of young people within the university environment these days, you know, the questions of what happens next, the questions of where we're headed, the questions of what we're building up to are always ever present. And I think for me, a conversation of this nature then at least enables people that are still within the university environment to get some insights into what happens thereafter. In your view, I mean, the concept of emancipation, what does it mean?
Okay. Thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to be here today. I was quite nervous, honestly, when I saw the panel. I'm just like, yo, I don't even deserve such, you know? But I'm just grateful for this opportunity, and also the team at ABASA Wits. They're really doing a great job. For me, this topic actually goes deep, right? Because I am 6 years younger than democracy, and it's just like, why am I having this conversation? Like, why do we still have to be here today speaking about things that could have been resolved, right? It is no conversation whatever that, okay, well, our past had an impact in whatever, right? But 26 years is quite a long time. Look at me, I'm just like 20, and it's like, okay, what were you doing this whole time? We're still having headlines like why a white man earns 3 times more than a black person, right? Because my focus is mainly to the economic side. And then it's like, okay, South Africa is the most unequal society in the world. And I'm just like, why are we having this conversation? What can we do? Why do we have this unemployment rate? And I got an opportunity to really research on this topic because I was just so confused. I asked a few peers, people who are still in university with me, and I'm just like, what can we do as young people? And it essentially came down to the leadership, right, that is in place. And because the people that are in charge, that have the resources to change or rather emancipate other people, are too old to understand our struggle. I can just make an example. My mom is like 20 years older than I am, which is not really a big gap, but we clash a lot. And I'm just thinking, she doesn't understand because she's from a different generation. So you can imagine if somebody is 70 years old, is sitting in parliament, and they deciding for a 12-year-old in primary school, they deciding for a 19-year-old in university, what should be done, what is suitable. And it all came down to, you know what, we actually need change in leadership. But how do we get there? That is the question, because everybody, when they get to power, it changes. It's no longer about everybody, it's about them, you know. Because I also feel like I think some of the panelists, my fellow panelists, touched on the mental part, and I think it has a lot to do with that, because it's like, okay, I'm here, I want to get there for my people, but once you're there, you have that mentality of being, no, I need to keep it here, I need to make sure that I'm well off, I suffered, I did that. It's always an I issue. It's never a collective issue. So I think it goes down to the leadership that we have, number one, and the spirit of Black people to be one. We need to be collective. And the how, again, is the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noluthando, for those remarks. And I think while you were speaking, we took a vote with the other panelists in that since none of us were born after 2000, like you so proudly told us that you're a 2000 baby, we are considering voting you out of this because now we're all suddenly feeling like fossils. So please watch out next time you highlight just how old we are by telling us how young you are. You're offending my fellow panelists out here. But here's a panelist who's not as offended as the others because I think he's long made peace with the fact that he's no longer as young as you are. And this is the main man himself, Mr. Luyanda Gidini, who most of you know very well because he's an ABASA stalwart. And a stalwart sounds like a good term, but no, I'm actually telling you guys just how old he is. So don't think that stalwart is a good term. It says that he's a fossil. Nevertheless, here he is, Mr. Gidini, welcome. And I mean, this is a conversation that we would have had years ago in one form or another. These are conversations that keep, you know, being reiterated in one form or another. At some point in time, I want to stop talking. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of talking, guys. I'm tired of looking at the BE Commission report every year and being told that, yes, somehow these are the demographics, somehow these are the statistics. And then somebody says, let's have a conversation. Everybody highlights what the issues are. And then boom, that's the end of it. It fizzles out. I'm tired of talking. But anyway, before we get into how we stop talking and start implementing, give us just your initial insights on really just the concept of emancipation, particularly as it relates to, you know, the type of people that we know are trying to transition from the various spaces, from school to university and to the world of work. What are your views?
Thank you so much, Jobe, for that introduction. I guess I am one of the older people on this panel, and I think I'll wear that with pride, that badge with pride. And I just had to apologize first and foremost to everyone listening. I think the amount of intellectual resources and capacity we have from the speakers, I think the opening statements, I'm learning quite a lot already. And I just would like to apologize. I think I'm benefiting, I'm either an affirmative action kind of panelist because I see I'm the only male here, but I'll wear it and I'll take my male privilege, and I hope that I don't disappoint my males, my fellow males who are listening. But just to start off, Jobe, just to answer your question in terms of, am I tired of having a conversation in terms of emancipation, in terms of the rights of our people? And I think we can never, ever have enough conversations because those conversations at some point need to lead to action. And I think everyone in their respective spaces, I mean, ABASA in its respective space as a organization tries to emancipate the accounting profession in terms of promoting it to a wider variety, a wider group of Black people, because currently it is, it's currently being swamped by white people. Everyone, everywhere, we're still doing that. You've already mentioned that we're 35 years old as an organization. And at what point do we stop being relevant as an organization? And I think if we stop having the conversations, then no one is going to act, and everyone is going to think that it's okay, the current status quo is fine. But I would like to take like a different turn. And the first time I ever heard the word emancipation, honestly, was from Bob Marley. And I think a lot of us are very familiar with the song, the Redemption song, which talks about emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our own mind. And that obviously comes from one of the popular speeches given by Marcus Garvey, where he talks about the exact same thing, that emancipation really starts from the mind. And I think my fellow panelist members have already alluded to that fact. I'd also, being obviously not being an accountant by nature, I really have no grounds to speak in terms of social ills, but I definitely do have an opinion on some of these things. But I'd like to just start off with a quote by Annie M.G. Smith. She's a Dutch writer, and one of the things that she said is that the best way to stimulate emancipation is to start to educate your sons to be humans instead of men, and to educate your daughters to be humans instead of women. And when I read that quote, it made me think quite a lot that, we spend so much time trying to identify ourselves as either I'm a man and therefore this is the role and the benefits of a man, or I'm a woman and you should treat me in this way and you should be, chivalry should be provided to me, I should get certain benefits. And at the end of the day, we'll all form parts of one race, the human race, whether you're Black, white, Indian, colored. we all are here, we all have the same ability, but because in terms of our own minds, in terms of our own thinking as humans, we tend to try to put ourselves in certain corners. We tend to put ourselves in certain groups, alienating ourselves from others, not being able then to relate to what other people are thinking or what other people are going through. If you're a white male, the first thing that you want to protect is your white privilege, or to protect what you define as whiteness. If you're a black person, depending on what tribe you are from, the first thing you want to do is protect and speak highly of the tribe, speak highly of your clan, speak highly of your role and your importance. And it's a mentality thing in terms of in order for you to feel better or to feel empowered as an individual, you almost want to see yourself better as someone else. And I think the first step in terms of emancipation is to realize that we are all on this earth, all created by one creator, depending on whatever your beliefs are. I'm not trying to turn this into a religious lecture, but just to understand your role and to understand that the person next to you, no matter what their duty are, no matter what their title is, whatever their role, you cannot assign your level of respect according to what a person's title is. And I find that many times, Khaya, we as individuals, if you're a CA, you get, whenever you have conversations and people ask, what do you do? And then you're like, yeah, no, I'm a CA. All of a sudden the conversation tends to go in a different direction. What do you do? I'm an advocate, I'm an attorney. All these titles, I'm a doctor. And we had to ask ourselves the question is, why is that important to begin with? If you ask me who I am, I should be able to tell you that I'm Luyanda Gidini, this is my parents, this is what I'm from, this is what I believe in, and this is what makes me who I am. Not the titles that I had studied for or the qualifications that I have. So yeah, Khaya, I think in terms of the conversation that I've been thinking about, in terms of unfortunately though, the conversation still becomes relevant because we live in a society where that is the first thing that you're taught. We are compared to each other based on what we have achieved. And therefore, in terms of our past also in South Africa, I mean, we all know the past, it does not need repeating right now, is that we come from a very ugly past whereby a very small minority of people who are very scared, very fearful of the Black majority, didn't want to work with the Black majority, felt it necessary to oppress a lot of people. And that's why we're currently having these discussions regarding BEE codes, while we're still having conversations regarding affirmative action, regarding equality amongst and representation. It's just, for me, it's just unfortunately where we find ourselves as a nation, and not necessarily South Africa only, but obviously all across the world. And I think the moments where, and we'll continue having these kind of conversations, unfortunately, because that's how we have been brought up. That's what we know, that's what we understand. But I think even Rudyard Kipling, and I'm just gonna paraphrase here, makes in his poem in terms of, like, if you are able to meet up with kings and still also conversate with common man on the streets, and you still maintain your same decorum, the same kind of manner, you don't look at them differently. I mean, those are the makings of truly becoming a human, of truly becoming a man or a woman, in the sense that you'll understand that all those titles and everyone actually just deserves respect. I think I'll just stop there, Khaya. Those are my opening comments regarding emancipation and its relevance.
Thank you very much, Luyanda. And I'd actually like to build up on one of the points that you raised here, in that, you say we get compared on the basis of what we have achieved. And I'd like to say that perhaps my experience has been a bit different, in that in the South African corporate landscape, for example, we don't get compared on the basis of what we have achieved. Rather, we get compared on the basis of what we look like when we achieve those things. And this simply means that you and I may have the same qualification, have the same skills, but because our skin colors are not the same, then you are regarded as either more or less competent just because of the basis of the skin color. So I think the concept of us being compared on the basis of what we have achieved is actually something that is not universal in South Africa. And I'd like to then just get a reflection from each of our panelists about really their own transition into the world of work and whether they saw any evidence of this. And I think the concept that Sihle used was the concept of the psychological safety in the workplace. And I mean, I always remember that when I started work in a very big corporate institution in Sandton, and it was scary for a couple of days. You know, there were these anxieties where you're like, yo, am I good enough to be with these people? They're speaking fancy English and, you know, they're driving cars and I'm still asking them where the tax rank is. So these things are reality. Melene, just take us through your own experiences of just that question of assimilating into the world of work in one way or another. Did you arrive and firstly have to deal with the fact that, oh my God, it's a she, there's particular problems. Oh my God, she's not white, there's particular problems. Did you experience any of that?
Mrs. Sithole, over the last 13 years of my career, I must be honest with you, I've worked in various capacities, in various organizations, private law firms, in government, and so forth. And obviously, after my experience when I finished my law degree, I went to work in a private law firm. And obviously, they were predominantly white, you know, so our leaders were Mr. Bosman and Mr. Leroux and so forth. And I was at the time, the only colored candidate attorney that used to work there. And I always felt that I had to overcompensate and then work harder and like really excel in everything that I did. And I also, for some strange reason, felt very offended when I would be called in by a Mr. Leroux, you know, to sort of condemn the work that I've done in court. So to a large extent, my early years working in a private law firm that was predominantly white was one of, I think, a low self-esteem. I had a low self-esteem working within the firm, but I always tried to overcompensate for whatever reason. I think it's because of where I came from, and also I had to prove myself in the space. But you know what, strangely enough, it was in that space that I realized, and I mean, today we laugh about it. I laugh with the Leroux and the Bosmans about it. I never charged. I worked at a private law firm, but I could never charge my clients. It was always black and colored people that used to come there for free legal advice, you know, and it was a private firm and I could never charge them. So I knew also at that stage that I was going to be a horribly poor lawyer. So because I can't charge people. And then I transgressed to the Constitutional Court, where I worked with Judge Albie Sachs and Judge Sandile Ngobo. And I mean, these people, these judges are just the pinnacle of equal and a just society. Like they didn't discriminate based on the fact of where I came from. You know, they judged me purely on my intellectual ability, on my ability to do the work, irrespective of what color the judge was at the time. And I have to talk about this because, you know, obviously later in my life, when I transcended into working in national government, I worked in the president's office, I worked at 2 national government departments, I worked in a predominantly Black African office. And again, I was the only colored woman that was in that space, in that political space. And it was very difficult. And I'm so glad that we're having this open and frank discussion, because I mean, many of them are my friends up until today. But there was the occasion that they would sort of, you know, terrorize me about my colored roots, where they would make fun of the fact that that my ancestors are bastard people and that we didn't know where we came from and so forth. So yes, I've experienced, not only from my own people, but I've experienced oppression and racism and, you know, just discrimination from all races in South Africa already, you know, but it's not everyone. It was really the kind of people, and I learned in that space that it was a matter of education. So at first I would laugh with you. If you made fun of me for whatever reason, I would laugh with you, and then I would educate you about certain things. If I was uneducated about your culture and I said something to offend you, the Melene that I am would be to open myself and ask, was I incorrect? Can you please correct me? I want to learn. I want to be tolerant and understanding of all cultures in South Africa. And I think really that is something that is lacking That is why we see race wars like we have never seen it before in South Africa. Whites on colored, colored on black, black on, it's absolutely insane. And I think it's really because of the fact that we do not understand each other's cultures, and we do not understand or have the tolerance to want to learn from one another. So my experience has not been an easy one. I've went through various episodes of depression because of these horrible experiences, but it has made me strong. It has made me strong and open-minded to be able to embrace more of South Africans. I hope that is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melene. Sihle, I mean, you know, the term that Melene just referred to now, in that, you know, you start feeling a bit anxious, you know, suddenly, you know, you don't know your own value, you start doubting yourself. And for me, you know, it's a question of, is this just a manifestation of the initial anxieties, then really becoming paralyzing, in that, you know, you start up on day one, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen. No one is holding your hand. And then other people are somehow able to transition much easier into the workplace. And then suddenly you discover that induction week is over, induction month is over, we're in the first or second month, and you just don't feel that you've really just found your footing in this place. And then suddenly nobody wants to work with you. No one wants to allocate tasks to you. No one wants to engage with you. You haven't built up that social capital that everybody else has been doing over the past couple of weeks. And then suddenly it's review time and everyone's like, yo, you're not performing. How do we deal with these things?
Yeah, it's such a complex issue to try and unpack, because it's got so many different layers to it. I think the one thing about, you know, Black professionals coming into the workplace, into the corporate space in particular, is that for so many Black professionals, they are the first generation in their families that are getting into this formal employment or into this corporate space. And then what that means is that you haven't been, what that then means is that you don't have somebody in your family who's been able to help groom you and prepare you for the workplace and this formal employment. And so you're going in completely blind. You go to varsity, and, you know, we are raised to believe that, you know, all you have to do is work hard and you'll get the rewards. All you have to do is apply yourself and your work will speak for you. And you don't really have to do much else. Nobody tells you it's about building relationships. It's about networking. It's about understanding who the power players and the influencers of the organization are. There's nobody who's going to hold our hands through that. Add to that the fact that when we were growing up, if you picked up a newspaper or a magazine, the people who were successful, the people who were profiled, were either white or Black and male, and hardly ever women. I remember when I was much younger, when I did see women in magazines, it was because they were Black women. It's because they were actresses or musicians, not because they were in these formal professions. And so I grew up with this, okay, so what does that then mean for Black women? We are not the ones who are in the forefront in our careers. We are the support structures. And so you get into the workplace, and then you start having all of these various experiences, the microaggressions, the being ignored, the not having a mentor. Nobody wants to be your sponsor within the organization. Nobody's holding your hand, taking into account the history of this country and the fact that you don't have the same exposure as Jan or Belinda, whose families have been in business or have been within the corporate environment for the past 30 years. You know, it's as though we go into the workplace and white people act as though, well, you know, apartheid never happened because now we are the Rainbow Nation. And we are left to deal with the repercussions of all of those generations of trauma and erasure and financial exclusion. And that comes with a lot of issues around anxiety, stress, depression, self-doubt, imposter syndrome. Do I even feel like I belong here? You know, being excluded, being isolated within the workplace is very lonely, and it takes a toll on you emotionally. So all of that begins to compound. And then when you don't even have a space within the workplace where you feel safe enough to say, I'm not okay, I'm struggling, or I don't know how to navigate the space, and trust that what you're sharing is not going to be used against you, then, you know, how is it that we expect Black professionals to actually have a sense of peace, or to feel like, you know, they can be free and they have equal opportunities, and that the playing field is actually level within the workplace?
It's a very, very, very difficult dynamic. And I think, you know, it doesn't help, Sihle, that for a lot of us who probably grew up in an environment where mental health is probably not recognized as something that actually requires intervention and attention. It's like, and all of those things. So even if you may feel that actually this is something that warrants intervention, you've got your own personal, anxieties and limitations as a creature of habit, and then also having to figure out the fact that this space is not working for me. And of course, it becomes important when 2 or 3 or 4 years later, I look at your CV and I say, she can't keep a job. She's job hopping. Dear God, she's a risk. I'm paying to recruit her now. I'm going to have to recruit someone else in 6 months' time. So suddenly, Sihle cannot get back into the workplace because of the consequential effects of all these things. So that becomes quite an important point. Busisiwe, I mean, we are talking here about just perhaps the issues that tend to emerge at the transition point from, the world of education into the world of work. What were your experiences when you tried to say, yay, I'm a graduate, I must be as good as anybody else, and then you get them, they're like, actually, you are good in relation to others that look like you. You are good in relation to others that speak like you. There isn't a universal concept of whether I'm good or not. What did you experience? Unmute, Busisiwe. Can't hear you. Busi, we can't hear you.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. Welcome
unmuted.
Back. Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, I completely forgot to unmute. But actually, let me talk about, so I've been acutely aware of racial inequality since I was very young. I grew up in a very political home. My parents were 1976 student activists. So I've grown up I think, just knowing the political realities of our country. But I really assumed for me that 1994 was this new era of equal opportunity, and how I always saw it was that my generation would close the gap, the racial wealth gap. So for me, it was fair game, fair challenge. I know the disparities that exist, but I think much to what Sihle said, to her point, just feeling that all I have to do is push and work hard, and I should be able to achieve just as much as anyone else, regardless of my background as a Black woman from Soweto. It's only when I stepped into university, I went to UCT, and I studied an accounting degree, actually. And yeah, again, I felt it was fake game. I had 2 scholarships. I was just, I was like, this is great. Let me do my vacation work, should be fine. Completely naive about what I call this continuous innovation of new ways to discriminate that happens in institutions that are historically white. And I use the word innovation because it's concealed ways to discriminate. So, it's not apartheid, it's not colonialism. What are you talking about? As a response to the very real institutional biases that are entrenched through things like, well, at UCT, just an example of my own situation. One professor just wouldn't allow students to miss a single lecture, regardless of what the reason was. So it didn't matter that, for instance, you couldn't afford to come to the class. Maybe you're commuting every day from Khayelitsha. It didn't matter that you're struggling with debilitating mental health issues. None of it mattered. And that's an example of a way to discriminate that is covert, because it assumes that everyone has equal access to resources to be on the same footing when they step into a lecture room or they step into a course. So I got into huge trouble when I was at UCT for challenging those sort of things. I was very vocal during Rhodes Must Fall and Feeds Must Fall, and I was actually suspended at UCT, so I'm not a graduate. But I mean, by the time that suspension was set aside, thank God for Prof. Mamokgethi Phakeng, I was completely over corporate and I was not interested in working in accounting or in economics or any of the other things I studied when I was at UCT. I looked at entrepreneurship, and for me, I felt that was going to be the space that I used to self-actualize, but also to just pursue some of the things I felt were so wrong about the society that we live in. You know, because an institution is a 100-year-old organization that has a legacy and things that it's not going to work through at my pace. But a business that I own or an organization that I own has 100 years ahead of it. And so I can chart a path that's unique to what I believe. And I felt quite strongly about that. And so I went into entrepreneurship, and the encounters of racism, I feel, in that space are not too different from corporate, specifically in the business I was in the beginning, because we were interfacing with corporate. So in a sense, you know, corporate CSI or corporate ESD would be, you know, sort of like a boss figure to myself and my partners in the business we were running. For instance, we were very anxious when we had to pitch. It was, to us, it's like, who are we going to be pitching in front of? And that caused tremendous anxiety, because we would find that we have to tweak our pitch based on who we're potentially going to be pitching to. If we're pitching to a white panel or a white decision maker, then we're probably going to lean mostly into how working with us can boost their BEE points, because we know they don't care about the merits of what we do. And the only reason primarily that they're going to work with us is economic advantage to themselves. And if we're pitching to you know, a person of color or woman, so we had all of those complexities that we had to navigate that were quite traumatic, because I think a lot of people assume that once you step into entrepreneurship, the world is your oyster and you don't have the same kind of problems as someone in a corporate environment. And then there was the issue of tokenization that I experienced a lot. So it's, oh, this well-spoken young Black woman, and let's put her on stages and give her platforms to represent our brand. And that causes a sort of cognitive dissonance, because you know you're working with an organization that doesn't espouse transformation as a value, but you're also being given an incredible opportunity to speak on a platform that could change your life. So now you're paddling to, and entrepreneurs get a lot of this criticism where it's like, you know, but Vusi Tembegoayo says this, but look at what like he does when he's in, and it's like entrepreneurs literally have to make decisions like that could potentially seem like selling out in many instances. And now recently I got into manufacturing and technology, and that space is even worse, because now I'm actually looking at actual systemic ways in the economy that keep Black people out of ownership of the economy. Banking, collateral, land and property rights, just compliance, trying to speak to the relevant people in some of the big companies in our country. And so you now sit with a plethora of issues that you thought you had dodged by not, you know, necessarily being in corporate. So, I mean, entrepreneurship as a sector also needs to sit to really have radical conversations on how we, you know, cross some of the barriers we have. Because what I find is that Black people in entrepreneurship are measured against white people standards without white people opportunities. And it's disheartening, man. I mean, I just come out of a disheartening meeting before this this event, but it gave me fire for it in any case, because I think we need to wake up to the realities and find strategies as a collective. So yeah, I think that's been my experience of just race and emancipation in the working context as an entrepreneur.
Thank you very much for those insights, Lucy. And I think obviously, you know, all our journeys quite nuanced in that some of us transition into the workplace differently to how other people transition. But I suspect that wherever you look, there's issues that tend to bedevil Black professionals in particular do tend to be universal. And of course, perhaps the issues themselves would be fine if that was the only thing that we had to deal with. So we at least knew that, you know, once you fix these things, then you sort it. But no, it's also a function of the space that you decide to navigate. It's also a function of, you know, the dynamics of the environment that you decide to go to. Luyanda, I mean, you work in the public sector. What are the unique additional challenges just associated with being a person who says, here I am, I'm here to take up a space, only to discover that actually the rules aren't what you were told in the classroom?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I struggle with, Khaya, in the public sector is the whole ageism mentality. It's less, I think there we less fights in terms of, race. And so, I mean, in a corporate space, I think your white colleagues will probably be more preferred because most of your senior executives are from those backgrounds, have gone to those schools. Whereas in the public sector space, the challenges are a bit different, particularly for me as being a young professional in an environment whereby a lot of my colleagues are not necessarily young. So many times I find myself being the youngest person in a room. That's why I was quite chuffed when you stated that I was probably the oldest in the room today. So I think that's a very welcomed change. And I guess it's just one of the things that you just have to deal with in terms of no matter what ability or capability that you may have, is just being looked at differently because you are considered to be young. You should be, no matter, I mean, I currently occupy a space of a CFO, and a lot of the people that report to me are much older than me. But yet, whenever I had to reprimand certain people or had to tell them that there's certain transactions that I will not approve, I get looked at and seen as being disrespectful. And I guess that also has a lot to do with the culture that we come up from as Black people, whereby we're taught to respect our elders. And as a young person, you need to know your space. Fortunately for me, I grew up in a family whereby my mother really encouraged from a very young age for us to express our feelings, to express what we believe and to do what we believe to be right. And being a professional public sector space, I think, look, right now, one of the things that is trending is the whole the PPE, yes, contract, 125 million contract between the MEC for the Department of Health and the Speaker of the Presidency, and and basically the relations that they have in terms of the two wives who are bridesmaids. And I think in the public sector space, the one thing that I do not, first, let me just, this disclaimer to say that I think these things exist in corporate. It's just that in corporate, it's not seen as bad if your friends or your wife's company or someone gets awarded a contract. It's only in a public sector space where that gets really highlighted. Because in corporate, nepotism happens each and every day, and we all know it, we all see it. We've all been victims of it. Whereas in public sector, there's actual laws which talk against those kind of things taking place. However, they still take place. So I think it's just wherever you go, whether you're young, I think we find ourselves, whatever spaces that we occupy. And I like what you said, just to take what you said earlier in terms of being discriminated, not necessarily based, or being seen or judged, not necessarily based on your qualification, but being judged in terms of your color. I think, look, man, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's, I get judged because of my height. Immediately they see a short person, they say, short man syndrome, and already I'm already seen in a certain way. You wear glasses, you consider to be a nerd. There are all these prejudices that we all live with that are innate in our being that we don't even know exist. We, in terms of how we relate to people, in terms of how we engage with people, it talks about that in the first 30 seconds or less, you already have an impression, you already judged a person just based on how they look, first impressions last. But why do we do that? What in 30 seconds is going to tell you about a character of a person, So I think I've currently just gone on a journey whereby, I definitely have certain biases being a young Black male. One, I tend to find myself not very trusting of different race groups other than myself. But then is that the correct mentality to have? Is that the kind of, teachings I want to take to my children? Do I want them to think that way and to relate to people that way? Definitely, they need to be educated in terms of the space that they live. But do I want them to then, without even thinking, already judge the next person sitting next to them? I think the conversations that we are having right now in terms of it's all about learning. Evelyn Toffler talks about the illiterates of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write. It's those who cannot learn, relearn, and unlearn. there's a lot of things that we have been taught, whether through our studies, whether from our parents, friends, churches, organizations, that we believe to be true without giving them a second thought. But a lot of those things in today's times are not relevant. These are things that are actually taking us back as a people. And I believe as an organization like ABASA, I'm really inspired when I see and meet young people like France, who's the chairperson of the Student Chapter. I believe Tsepo was giving the opening remarks, led by Mokgabo and the team to, and bringing up these kind of conversations in terms of the relevance of emancipation. I'll tell you right now, Khaya, when I was in varsity, these are not the conversations I was thinking about. These are not the things. I was just trying to make it, man. I was just trying to pass, and get through Wits, which showed me flames. I just want to say that first and foremost. So good luck to you, Noluthando, in your journey. But I'm really encouraged in terms of the future, whereby I think if we are already having the youth, and when I talk youth, I'm not talking about 35, I'm talking about like the youth, like the people who are currently on the score right now, having these kind of conversations, unpacking the meaning of emancipation. Sorry? Kai, did you say something?
Oh, carry on, Luyanda.
Oh, you just messed up with my flow. But I think that's basically your way of saying that I should just keep quiet and shut up now. But yeah.
No.
I think I'll just
that
stop there.
That wasn't it. So I think I'll actually
What's wrong?
That's what I was trying to deal with, Luyanda.
Was that Brenda? Okay.
No, Luyanda, thank you very much for those insights. I think perhaps one of the big questions that we have to deal with is really how we actually prepare young Black people to understand the world of work rather than ambushing them at the point of entry. So how do we make them aware from a young age? How do we make them aware through the university environment in particular that this is what's about to hit them? Noluthando, I mean, you've been at university for a couple of years now. Have you at any point in time felt that, perhaps the way the university curriculum or the university interactions are structured are designed to sort of make you aware that, by the way, we are preparing you for a world of work or a world of, business that looks like that. And these are the things that you're going to face as challenges. So please start learning about them, start reading about them, so that when you get there, you don't feel this overwhelming ambush that far too many of us actually experience for the first time when you get to the workplace.
So thank you to Luyanda first. I need the good luck. It's very tough. So honestly, if we're being honest, right? If it wasn't for societies like ABASA, I wouldn't know that there's issues in the corporate. For one, most of us get into the degree for the hype, it's like a whole thing. Well, I have good marks, I have this, so I can make it, and you really learn about the actual degree when you're doing it. It's like, okay, I'll just figure it as it goes. And as it goes at home, you're just told, focus, get good marks, get a sponsor, you'll be good. So I didn't really think there were issues. But myself, I have a history. I was in an Afrikaans school, so I really encountered a lot of racism, and to a point, I just thought, you know what? I hate the other race. I'm done with them. I'm never doing anything that has to do with them, because I remember this one instance when there was a mistake on my statement. The department had made, I think, a 50-something% difference. Yeah, they made a mistake. And I went to the guy who was responsible. He was like, it never happened. It happened once in 8 years. And I'm like, but I'm the second one. I'm the second one in 8 years. The fact that it happened means it's possible. And he didn't really help me. And that's when I was just like, you know what? I'm done with this race. I remember I wanted to go to UP. I was like, no, I'm gone. I'm done. And when I got to Wits, that's when I knew about ABASA. And then I started knowing about these issues that I never thought existed. And now you really learn a lot. You just like, oh, okay, because my color, this still goes on. I thought I ran away from it in high school. Now it's happening again. Yeah. And really, it's really discouraging also, Let me just say that, because you get to university with that oomph, you know, I want to do this, and then it's discouraging. And then there's also beyond the race, it's this whole gender thing, you know, and you encounter a lot. It's so sad. It's really sad. But now the conversation would be, what are we doing? What are we doing about gender? We can't just sit and talk about it. Yes, talking about it is really needed, because now we making it known that, okay, this is an issue, but talking about it isn't helping. Let's first, everybody must get down, and we have to sit and say, okay, we have an issue with the race, right? Rather than other people are out here like, no, no, we must just leave it in the past. It's not in the past, it's happening. Let's do something about it now. And the whole gender thing, it's no, no, man, we must empower women. Let's not empower, let's give them the same opportunities. Let's start there, let's start here, fix it now. Let's make it an issue, let's make it a point, because I'm sure there's people that are encountering system problems. But myself, I don't really pay attention to those things at this, because I'm just like so into this thing that, okay, you must just focus, because if you don't focus, if you don't get good marks at home, they're asking, okay, what's wrong? And then you're telling them, no, I'm depressed. No, that's white people's disease or whatever. Don't focus on that. Just grind. So at the end of the day, it starts with us, really. That's why I sit here today. I'm just like, okay, as young people, what are we doing? Let's do something as this generation, because we don't want to find ourselves 10 years down the line where that generation, we're like, okay, what have we done? What have we done? We literally haven't done anything, and we're still gonna, do we want our kids in 10 years to come to be still sitting here talking about these issues? What are we doing? What are the other people in the corporate doing also to help us? What are we doing?
No, thank you very much for that, Noluthando. And I think for me, you raise a very important question around the role of institutions. I mean, Melene, we have to talk about the fact that perhaps institutions are in a much better position, or at least in a much stronger position to influence and drive change, because let's face it, if an entire institution says that we are championing a particular cause, the ability for them to get things done is much stronger than you as an individual undertaking that responsibility and saying, I'm going to try and push, I'm going to try and do things, because your best intentions notwithstanding, your reach and your impact is limited to the audience that might know about you, the networks that might know about you, but institutions are far more agile and are far more impactful. Do you get the impression that in South Africa, our institutions, whether it's the places we work in or the places we study in or other places we interact with, have an understanding that we do have something to talk about? We do need to be able to talk about how to fix these issues, and are acknowledging and doing something about it.
Thanks, Khaya. Absolutely. Wow, you're touching on gold now, because this is actually the crux of the issue here, you know, and also institutions of government, you know, in terms of the progressive policies. That's where the BE and affirmative action and all these kind of policies come in. I don't believe that our government, even with gender equality as well, and I really hope that at some point we'll be able to deal with that issue, because I really want to dig into that as well. Because if you had the political will within the government institution, we would have had, for example, a women economic empowerment policy on the table, but they are not championing the issue of women. They are not progressive in the issues of women. So even with regards to creating frameworks within companies, business in itself, especially white-owned businesses, there has to be policies that protects the interests of its employees. There has to be transformational policies in place within these organizations to ensure that, you know, Black or races are fairly represented within the organization. And if you have been sort of violated, that there are a specific policy that deals with that. The institutions play such a critical role in the transformation of the organization. But then you look at who's the head. You will see that it is a white male. You will then go to HR and you will see that it is a white female. And so obviously these policies that is currently existing is not in the interest of any Black employee at all, which makes it exceptionally difficult to navigate your way through that. I'm not going to necessarily talk about the educational institutions in itself, because I haven't been there for a long while, but the same principle applies. It is the responsibility of a good leader within government and within the corporate sector to ensure that they adhere to transformational policies within their companies. But far and beyond that, what are the penalties? You see, these people are getting away with so much. We go out, we protest for policy. They say they're going to develop a policy. They develop the policy, but then they don't implement the policy. There's no political will. There's no financial resources backing these policies to make it a reality, to make it effective. And that is where we are currently within South Africa. Khaya?
My devices are misbehaving. No, thank you very much for that, Melene. And I think, when we do talk about institutions, we really need to find perhaps better ways of holding them accountable, because, when you say that institutions can do things, we know for a fact that perhaps in every single listed company there on the JSE, when you talk about who is on the board of directors, the numbers and the profiles usually don't give you the right racial mix. Except, of course, when you then ask who's the head of HR, and it happens by some strange coincidence that the majority of the heads of HR happen to be Black people. And yet here we are talking about all these issues, and you're thinking, wait a minute, surely if you have someone at the executive level who understands the type of issues we're dealing with, then the institution itself has committed to doing something about it. How are people still saying the system just isn't working for me? Sihle, Bolani, what are your views?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, look, the issue of organizations actually doing anything about meaningful transformation in the organization is a very, very big problem. Within the corporate space, I find I have diversity fatigue, right? I'm so sick and tired of hearing organizations speaking about, these great diversity programs that they have, because we know the truth, right? We know that when an organization says that they have a diversity program, it's likely to have been developed, approved by white people. We know and understand that if a Black person is a head of HR, they don't have sufficient organizational power transferred to them to enable them to be able to drive an agenda that supports and protects Black people. We know and understand that where Black people are in executive positions within organizations, particularly, when they're not in business units that are income generating. So HR, you'll find hordes of Black people, and particularly Black women who are executives. But if you're looking at finance, if you're looking at legal, where are we? And those are the people who tend to have most of the influence within organizations. When organizations talk about putting together a diversity program, they are talking about, okay, we're going to bring in more Black women, we're going to bring in more disabled people, we're going to bring in more people of the LGBTQIA+ community. And we have to start questioning and go, okay, so if we have a culture, if we have an organizational culture that has I guess bits and pieces of homophobia, right? If we hear homophobic comments within this organization and people laugh or just kind of let them slide, who within the LGBTQIA+ community is going to feel comfortable about disclosing that they're part of this community? And so how are you going to know that you are actually achieving those targets? Because you've done nothing to actually transform the existing culture to be able to ensure that you're creating a safe space that supports this new diversity program or strategy that your organization is driving. And so you're not actually doing anything. If you're saying that you want to have more Black women coming into the space, have you dealt with the racism in your organization? Have you dealt with the misogyny and the sexism and the sexual harassment in that organization? Because if you haven't, then you're bringing in these people into a space that is already rotten. And so we are coming in thinking we're coming to do this great job. This organization is diverse and, you know, they want more of us in the space, but we're coming into a space that is going to destroy us emotionally, physically, mentally. But also it limits our opportunities, because all of those various lenses of prejudice and bias that exist are going to influence how we're viewed. They influence, you know, when they put out a job vacancy, when they get the CVs in, which names are they immediately drawn to? What kind of names are they drawn to when they are starting to shortlist the candidates that have come in? You know, how do they look at issues like salaries? You know, if you have a job that is pegged at between 600 and 850,000 Rand, and you get a candidate who comes in and they're brilliant, they're Black, which probably means that they've been earning 2 to 3 times less than their white counterparts. And you know, have this amazing new diverse organization, and you interview this person and all you do is give them a 6% increase, when you know that you should actually be correcting that gap if you want to truly be diverse and inclusive and transformative as an organization. Because if you are witnessing inequality, it's your job, you have a responsibility to be able to contribute towards the reversal of that. And that's why equality cannot exist without the equity part of it. You know, we have legislation that speaks to equal pay for work of equal value, but there's nobody there to make sure that these organizations are actually doing that. You know, employees are still forced to keep their salaries a secret. They're threatened, you know, to ensure that they're not having these conversations with their colleagues. And so how do you hold organizations accountable? So it doesn't help to have great legislation if the implementation is poor, because we remain stuck in the same cycle. We remain stuck with the same challenges, and Black people still feel alone. We still feel like we've kind of been put on a raft and, you know, pushed off into sea, and it's choppy waters constantly.
Thanks, Sihle. I'm struggling with my network a bit, but I'm back on now. And I suppose, you know, we probably have spent too many years over the time hoping that the systems were going to transform themselves organically. And I suspect, Busisiwe, what we are seeing now is the hard evidence that perhaps this idea of organic transformation doesn't work in a country like South Africa, where far too many people in positions of authority really have nothing to lose if things do not work out. And I think now we need to start reflecting on what is it that we can do in our own small spaces to actually then be able to keep highlighting or amplifying the fact that, well, actually things need to happen differently. What is it that we need to start doing?
Let me just unmute. Okay, there we go. Khaya, I'm going to take it back to what I said in my opening about equity and efficacy. You could have a strong moral conviction for creating economic and political policies and strategies that support the redistribution of income and wealth. But if you don't sort out the equity issue, then it's not going to reach everyone, and certainly not the right people. And if you don't sort out the efficacy issue, then even those that it does reach might not be truly empowered to change outcomes. And largely, I concur with my 2 former speakers who really just articulated all of these issues well. I mean, if you look at the equity issue, you're talking about the actual distribution of that income and wealth. So it's not enough to say, here's BE and here's affirmative action and here's a bunch of other policies that are redistributive in nature, without looking at the ways in which that transfer of income and wealth is moving to different people in society based on their positionality. So I'm going to say it in plain and simple terms. You've got this political alliance between the ruling party and white monopoly capital. It's a real word. But you've got this alliance that traps redistribution at the top, that such that it benefits political elites. So you've got, you know, a bunch of rich Black people who have stock in the JSE, you know, 23% of the Black population, and in many ways for a lot of white people, it's seen as a reason to believe that, yeah, but you got your redistribution, so what more do you want from us? But you look at how that bottleneck has trapped that wealth and that income in a space that it is not allowing it to trickle down to reach the ordinary person. I mean, when they released the COVID-19 funds, many people in the townships and rural communities were already saying that we probably will not see a cent of this money, just due to like it being eaten up by like all the corruption that happens at a political level in our country. And so you really have to address that equity issue and looking at how do my policies for redistribution reach the people who need it most. And that applies for corporate, it applies for NGOs, it applies for entrepreneurship. And then you've got efficacy, which is the outcomes that your policy is producing, and whether or not the policy is like Sihle said so profoundly, is giving individuals the power to drive agendas. And again, you don't have that in our country. So if you look at corporate and you're looking at a BE score sheet that gives you certain prescriptions, for example, at an ownership or at a management level, then yeah, you know, white organizations will comply, but what they'll simply do is hire Black women in HR and a Black man in marketing, and that's all they'll do. So you've got a problem there where there's a perceived sense of empowerment and redistribution that is happening in the media or at face value, but covertly, like I had said in my previous response, it's really just an innovative way to drive the focus away from the real transformation that needs to happen. And so we need to really then think about who holds the power in this conversation and how that can be changed. And to a large degree, sure, it's white people, they control the economy. I know there's a lot of arguments that they don't, they do. 23% Black ownership in the JSE is not even moving a needle in terms of Black economic empowerment in the country. And you know, there's this saying that's very popular in America, especially during this Black Lives Matter movement, that white people only change things when they no longer benefit from it. You had a number of brands doing Blackout Tuesday. And if you look at it, it was because it was popular to do Blackout Tuesday. If you didn't participate in Blackout Tuesday, you're going to lose consumers. And so it's really a material decision to support Black Lives Matter more than it is a moral one. And for me, I don't care, because it's a win in any case, because now at least I can hold you accountable for it. So what you need to start seeing is a push from all sectors of society, you know, everyone in varsity to everyone at home, to consumers of pop culture and political leaders. You need to see them changing the norms such that it no longer benefits white people to maintain status quo. And only when it doesn't benefit them will they buy into the equity and efficacy argument. But before that happens, you know, there really is no incentive for it to happen, and for it to happen in a meaningful way. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, and most of it sits at government level, but we also have a responsibility in this whole thing.
Thank you for that, Busi. And I suspect some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat is this really the question of this burden of doing things. So we, the Black people, have to be the ones that educate other people about what it means for us to be in that space and feel so exiled and feel so alienated. We are the Black people that have to keep explaining to people what the intergenerational consequences of what was done before are. I'm getting tired of being the Black person that has to explain to other human beings what it means to be who I am in a country where the conditions were materially altered by their actions and not my own actions. It's a big problem. Luyanda, what's your view on that?
What is your question, Khaya? Being tired of
Senzenjani, we're tired of having to explain ourselves, brother.
Look, man, I think it's a journey, and I mean, it's a journey that, I mean, begins with a single step, right? It's a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And in terms of emancipation, in terms of changing the narrative of what we want to see in this country, I mean, there was a generation before us, I mean, the Andrew Mlangenis of our times, they played their parts in terms of trying to emancipate Black people. They did what they could do in terms of getting what we can term as political freedom. Currently, we are sitting as youth whereby we may be represented according to the political structures, but in terms of the economy, and Busi and all the other speakers have made mention, is that we're nowhere close when it comes to land redistribution, when it comes to financial, our shares in terms of the JSE, in terms of the economy, in terms of how we participate. We literally, there's a huge cake when it comes to resources within this country. And although we might be the majority, we're still fighting for the crumbs of that cake, which is something which is very unfortunate. In terms of being tired, I think, if you're not going to do it, Khaya, if you're not going to speak on our behalf, honestly, who's going to do it? If Melene, Busi, if Noluthando, if Sihle, if all of us on this platform are not having these kind of conversations, if we are not in our respective spaces, taking it upon ourselves to make sure that, what we see as being unfair treatment, what we experience as being wrong and incorrect, if we tire, then I think there's really like no hope. And, I say it as if it's an easy conversation to have. It definitely isn't. To fight for your space is tiring. To fight for what should be a basic human right is literally something that I don't think anyone should have to go through. But unfortunately, the reasons why there is such a thing as white privilege, the reason why there is these systems or a certain group of people who are benefiting is because before them, there were people who fought for that. You know what I mean? Who fought for future generations to gain that kind of privilege. And the current generations, and I'm speaking specifically, obviously, in terms of white people, are benefiting from their forefathers and ancestors in terms of all the wars, all the genocide, and all the killings that they did. They're benefiting from it because they fought. They knew that anything worth getting required a fight. So I think that it's a long journey, and it's one journey that I think as ABASA and different organizations, I think Melene represents women lead movements. These are conversations that in an ideal world, in 2020, you would think that we should not be speaking about the relevance of a woman in a boardroom. We should not be speaking about why there needs to be, female emancipation, female empowerment. You would think that at this time, in this day and age, those are the conversations we'll not be having. But unfortunately, there's definitely people out there, and I'm not speaking as if it's a third force, because those people are literally our brothers, our sisters, it's our colleagues, it's people that we see every day who do not want to see that change. And we can call it patriarchy, we can call it tribalism, we can call it, according to the Bible says that a man is this and a woman is that. All these kind of teachings, all these kind of preachings are things that you have to look and take a step back and reflect in terms of, but what does this say about me, as these are the things that I believe myself. And that's why I keep on talking about the whole learning, relearning, and unlearning of certain things, is that as a people, as a person, it's up to you in terms of being, and I'm quoting kind of obviously, being the change that you want to see in the world. So if there's things that you are not happy with, no one else is going to fight that fight for you, brother. It's going to be you. And I hope in terms of these conversations that we're having today, I just hope it's not another talk show. I hope that we all need to understand that this is going to be a journey. It's not going to be fixed through this webinar that we're having. There's no knowledge or wisdom that I can say to you right now that's going to eliminate or alleviate the kind of oppression that we face as Black people. But there's definitely ideas where more than two are gathered together, whereby if we bring our minds and we think about, okay, these are the oppressions, and these are the wrong things that are taking place. How do we fix it, and how do we go forward? So I just hope that we never tire, Khaya, on that journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luyanda. And I suspect you are now bringing us back to the bigger question of whether we'll be better served by having some collective structures or some collective bargaining, platforms. They can actually deal with the type of issues that have become individual pursuits when it's actually tackling a universal problem. But on the stage, I'd actually like to bring in some of our fellow participants in this conversation. We're seeing people asking questions in the chat room, and also there are questions that we have gathering on the YouTube link. So I'm going to ask my fellow host to actually get back on the line and give us a couple of questions that our people out here are willing to ask. There you go.
All right. I feel like it would be better for people to just like ask the questions themselves, because I feel like they would better articulate their questions. So I noted Frank. Frank had very, very good points raised in the comment section, and Candy Sikau after that. And then we also have ABASA Zulu with the hand raised. So we'll start with Frank, and then we'll go to Candy, and then we'll go to ABASA Zulu. Is that okay?
Thank you very much for the platform. I'm in the chat. I was just stating opinions. I just have questions on the side. The first one comes from the second question that Khaya asked about different panelists. Do they have any experience of some form of discrimination against them? And Melene raised an important point about how she always had to educate, right? And I want to ask the question because some of us leaving university, going into corporate again, is that the expectation we each need to have for ourselves that we unfortunately need to do or engage in? Or basically my question is how to be active and drive emancipation in the workplace? Because it seems it's a burden we all have to or will face in the workspace. So how do we be active and drive emancipation in the workplace? Melene, I think and Sihle, I'm interested in hearing your opinions on that.
Thank you very much, Frank. I mean, I want to give you a very, very positive answer and say, don't worry, you know, things might change in the workplace or wherever you're going to work, but the same prejudice that you come from your home with, you take to your office. So it's not a matter necessarily, and it's these people with their prejudice, with their collective prejudice, that causes a very, very toxic working environment. So what I'm trying to say is that the issues that happen in work cannot necessarily be dealt with policies. You say, let's say for instance that someone is discriminating, you know, one white guy or whatever is discriminating against me, and I go to HR and I lay a complaint. I say, listen here, you know, you need to do something about this. You know, this guy has been harassing me, he's been calling me all sorts of names. They do whatever they do, but the issue is not resolved. Why is the issue not resolved? Because we have embedded prejudice within us all. And if we do not deal with the prejudice that exists within our communities, within our family structures, because that shapes the person that you are. It shapes the person that you become, whether at home or at work. So we need to deal with the issue there. That is genuine, and that is where I'm working at. I work in communities, for example. It's changing those mindsets, changing the attitudes, changing the behaviors of people, races between each other, religions between each other, finding common ground, you know, instilling basic principles of respect and having dignity for one another. Because if you do not have that, it will be carried into the institution where you will work. There is nothing, Frank. Not at university level. They can come with the best psychologists, whoever they want to in your final year, and they can give you a crash course in terms of, guys, this is the manual. You might get person X, Y, and Z, and just be careful. No, no, no. You have no idea who you're going to come up with. You have no idea. Let me tell you, and this is a fact, take it from a 35-year-old. One of your biggest enemies in the company is going to be a black person. It's going to be the same person. It's going to be the person that looks like you. And that is what's going to make this thing so different, so difficult for you to handle. Because I never expected to be oppressed by a black person. Never in my entire life. Because I thought we were the same. But clearly we're not. Clearly that person had different prejudices that they brought into. Ideas that was instilled within them from their families or from their parents or wherever it came from. That influenced their behavior within that working environment. And that is the challenge that we are dealing with here. I hope that answers somewhat, Frank.
I mean, I don't know how much more I can possibly add to that because pretty much covered everything. I think also, it's important to bear in mind the fact that when you are going into, an organization, or if you do find yourself having, all of these various issues within your organization, and maybe there's grievances or whatever legal issues there are, it's so important to remember that at the end of the day, the organization will focus on staying on the right side of the law, not necessarily staying on the right side of ethics. And that's where so many of us get so wound up and so emotional, because it's an injustice, it's wrong, it's so unfair. And all they do is go, is it legal or not? Yes, okay, sharp. Did we follow the right process? Yes, okay, sharp. The other details, they don't concern themselves with that. And we focus on those details, right? Instead of focusing on the legal aspects of whatever fight that we have with the organization. But I think that, it's incredibly important to, what Melene was saying around your biggest enemy could be somebody who looks like you. And that's very true, right? Because when you get into the workplace, there's a psychology around, yes, there's the issue of racism. Yes, there's sexism. And those things are relatively clear cut. Where it starts getting complicated is when you start dealing with the result of trauma, right? And if you look at it, particularly in the context of Black people, the trauma that comes with having to have gone against the odds, survived in spite of your, the conditions that you grew up in, you survived in spite of apartheid, you survived in spite of poverty, you survived in spite of all of these things. And then the mentality is, I've got to get into the workplace and I've got to be the best Black person, right? Because I want to be the first Black woman to be in this exco. And that means that I've got to be like, fuck off to all the other Black women, because we are not friends, we're enemies, we're competing here, okay? We are not equal, I'm going to show you. And that's a mentality that you can never be prepared for, because there's so many layers to the individualism that exists within the workplace. The drive for personal success, personal goals, Black exceptionalism. You want to stand out. You want to be the different Black. You want to be the Black who doesn't have the Black accent. You want to be the Black who doesn't look like the other Blacks. You want to be the Black that laughs at racist jokes because you don't want them to think you're too serious or you're not fun to be around. You want to be invited to the braais. There's so many things that come into play that influence how people show up in the workplace. Add to that the fact that for many of us, we understand that when we go into the workplace, we have to leave our Blackness at the door, right? Because we don't want to be too threatening. We don't want to be, like, oh, you see, shouldn't have let the Blacks in. You want to assimilate into this culture, right? And this culture is white and it is Western and it is far removed from your identity as a Black person. And all of these things just create this amalgamation of anxiety and stress, and having always trying to think constantly about how you're supposed to show up, and all of the answers to that question are showing up as everything but who you are.
I feel like it's actually very scary to know that in the workplace, you're actually fighting against your own to be up there, you're fighting against your own just to blend in with the rest of the people that are already there. Shoot, no, that's actually very scary, because I feel like nothing even prepares us for this kind of mindset that because you were oppressed, because you worked so hard to get there, now you need to oppress other people. It's actually very, very scary. And then in terms of questions, we also had ABASA Uni Zulu with their hand raised. I don't know if they still want to like ask a question or make a remark.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first I'd just like to make a remark and then I'll just ask two questions. My remark is, I'm quoting something: "We were all humans until race disconnected us, religion separated us, politics divided us, and wealth classified us. In the midst of such a situation, we should strive to bring out the little humanity still left in us and learn to respect each other regardless of our differences." As Luyanda has pointed out, that the road to emancipation is a journey. I'd like to use a similar analogy, but I'd like to put it as a relay race. So the generations of your Rolihlahla Mandelas, your Andrew Mlangenes, your Dennis Goldberg, Nkosi Albert Luthuli, they ran the 250-meter stint and they passed on the baton. Now the problem came with those who had to continue with the work. I feel as if there was this stumbling block that happened post-94 or post the Mandela age that we never ever recovered from. And we need to find a way of how do we pick up the slack that caused that mess up, and then also continue to our road of success as Black people. So my first question is, how do we correct this, or how do we pick up the slack so we could move forward? Because I feel as if as Black people, we are in this black hole, I'd like to call it, where good the pambili, good the mover, there's no progress. My second question would be is, how do we handle being advocates for the Black race? Because I find that as Black people, you'll be in that boardroom, one of 20, the only Black person in that boardroom, and most of the time they'll turn to you and say, so how do Black people feel about this? So you end up becoming the advocate for all Black people, and you have to make those decisions, and somehow your opinion is the only voice of Black people that will be heard in that space. So just to reiterate, my first question is, how do we pick up the slack? And the second question is, how do we handle being advocates for the Black race? Thank you.
So I'm gonna, okay, let me just start off. I'm just gonna look at the second part of your question. Advocacy for the Black race, which is also always a very interesting thing for me, because there definitely is always that expectation that one Black person is all Black people, right? And it always comes back to the issue of why it's so important for Black people to be included in conversations around transformation and diversity in the workplace, because of the intersectionalities that exist within Blackness. One of the biggest frustrations that I have as a Black woman is that in so many spaces, I'm expected to show up and be like all other Black women. We're all supposed to be the same. We're all supposed to show up in the same way. We're all supposed to respond to issues in the same way. And it doesn't take into account, you know, the fact that, you know, there's intersections that exist, like I'm a single mom, or, you know, I didn't go to Wits because I, you know, maybe I didn't get an exemption, rather I went to a different, you know, school or a technicon or whatever the case may be, and how that then influences my opportunities for jobs or how I'm perceived as a candidate within the workplace. You know, if you didn't go to Wits and you went to, for instance, a Boston, are you dumber than other people because you enter a Boston? But what I think is important in those conversations, to be able to call out, because this is now part of the education part of it, and it's very exhausting as a Black person to be educating people. But we do still need to do that in some spaces. And so it's so important to be able to say, yes, I'm here as a Black person, and there are specific things that I can give feedback on in terms of my experience as a Black person or my expectations as a Black person. But I certainly cannot speak on behalf of all Black people, because there are so many different intersections that exist. And in order for us to have a meaningful dialogue around this with very clear actions and outputs, we need to bring in more Black people into this table. It needs to be a lot more representative. You know, I always find it so interesting when we think about just the demographics of South Africa as a country, right? Which is predominantly Black and predominantly Black women. And it's an okay demographic to see it reflected like that in terms of poverty. It's okay that the face of poverty is Black because it reflects the demographics of the country. It's okay that, you know, access to healthcare, Black people don't have the right kind of access because it reflects the demographics. So naturally, there'll be more Black people who don't have access to healthcare. If you're thinking about, you know, whatever the case may be, when it's negative, generally, it's okay because the demographic slant is predominantly Black people. But when we think about it in the context of wealth, when we think about it in the context of leadership, when we think about it in the context of influence within professional and business circles and, you know, various sectors within the country, why are we comfortable with the fact that the representation does not match the demographics of this country? And these are the conversations that we need to be having to say, how is it that I can walk into a boardroom in almost any financial institution in this country. I can go to the Sandton CBD and walk into any one of those buildings. And I'm pretty sure that if I look at the top 3 levels of leadership within that organization, it's not going to be representative of South Africa's demographics. And that influences the decisions that are made in that organization. That influences their view of Black people. That influences the level of importance that they give to Black voices and Black experiences within the workplace.
Yeah, thank you, Sihle. I think if I can also just respond, I think you raised some very good questions. And again, I just want to reiterate that I'm always encouraged by the student chapters and the kind of, people we have serving within ABASA structures, because those are two difficult questions in terms of how do we pick up in terms of the slack, and how do you, the advocacy of the Black race. I think as an individual, you need to understand that there's certain things only you would have gone through, and maybe people around you who are like you would have experienced. To try to speak on an entire Black race, I think one is, and excuse me if this comes across wrong, it is a bit arrogant to want to speak on behalf of an entire race. I think there's certain, if you speak about the wrongs and ills that you have experienced, and a few or people that have experienced, that's the start, because you're speaking from a point where you can relate to and something that you can speak to, if that makes sense. The moment where we try to seem as though we are the voice of the people, first of all, the people, given any given circumstances, will be at one end of the corner or the other. So I think we should never try to find ourselves in a position whereby we speak on behalf of those unless we've gotten a mandate to, I always try to, and I always try to reflect in terms of the advocacy and in terms of the spaces, is how do I make my experience better for the next person, whoever's going to be coming after me. So if I'm in a corporate space, or rather where I'm in the government space, occupying the seats that I occupy, what are the things that I'm experiencing which I think are unfair, that I feel like if this was not there, the world would be a better place. And I think that's one thing that we should look at in terms of our role, in terms of advocating for anything, because there's a lot of ills and wrongs in this world. And we can either accept it, but it's always the people who actually do not accept things as they are that end up changing the world. So I always encourage that in any space that you occupy, do not sit silent, do not be mute. You might not be the popular opinion. Mostly, whenever you go out and you speak against the wrongs, and I think Melene spoke about it, you're definitely not going to, you're not always going to, if you're the only Black person in the boardroom and there's certain things that you are seeing, chances are no matter what you're saying, even if you're the chairperson of that board, you'll be outvoted by the majority of the people who are there. You as a lone voice will not really necessarily make that change. You can start that change. You can obviously lead the way in terms of making a change possible. But in terms of that change actually happening, implementing that change, we all have to depend on each other. And it's an organization like ABASA whereby we come with a collective voice. We are sitting here today, this evening, discussing a very relevant topic, the relevance of emancipation, and we all got different opinions, we all have different views. And it's those collective views that we need to use as advocating in terms of how do we move forward. How do we pick up on the slack? It all starts with you, right? Don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It's a very famous quote by, I believe it's John F. Kennedy. Khaya will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's exactly what the kind of mentality that I've always tried to bring in any space that I come in. I don't come with an idea of entitlement. I try not to. I know I probably do, but it's always thinking about then how do you make things better for the next person. And I think in terms of the analogy that you use in terms of the relay race, it's a race that will continue to run, but we would have known that we have won if we had made situations better than how we found them ourselves. So if you come into a space and yeah, I think let me just end there, give Melene a chance to say something. Thanks.
Sorry for the interruption, Luyanda. Listen, yeah, I'm jumping off my seat here because it's such a brilliant question, the first part, you know. Listen, the big problem with South Africa, and this is also part of the work that I do, is the fact that when we became a democracy, we felt and believed that democracy meant we only vote and that's the end of it. We forgot that there was a role for civil society even after elections. And what we have done since 1994 was relinquish our power as citizens of self-actualization, and we gave that power over to the government to decide for us what they wanted to do. And so 26 years later, we're sitting with half-baked policies, we're sitting with a half, implementation of the National Development Plan and all these other plans that they had that is just not working. We are sitting with unemployment. By the end of this year, it will be 50% unemployment. We are sitting with 18 million people currently on social welfare. You cannot tell me that we are moving towards emancipation when we are actually still now enslaving our people even more. We think this is a celebration of having 18 million people on social welfare. In fact, we should be the champions of mediocrity within South Africa. Civil society, the young people, everyone should be blamed for what is currently happening here. Why? Because after our vote, we become quiet. The apathy is loud. And the problem is that I have, and I always tell the youth that I work with, let me give you a quick statistic. There's 36 million eligible voters in South Africa. In 2019, 27 million of the 36 million registered to vote. 10 million didn't. And those 10 million that didn't register were under the age of 30. It's you people here in this chat group here. It's you. You guys didn't register to vote. 10 million. Of the 27 million, only 17 million people went out to vote. Another 9 to 10 million people didn't even vote, even though they registered. So what does that tell us? It tells us there's 20 million people in South Africa that didn't vote. Now come, let me tell you what the opportunities are there. We want to throw stones at the EFF. I do not believe in their political ideology, but I celebrate people like that. Why? Because they were young people that took the Section 19 right in the Constitution to form a political party because they believed that they had alternatives. They believed that they had different ways in which they could save the economy and grow socially and do whatever. And they went straight to Parliament. Where's the other young people? Why are you not starting your political parties? If you believe that you have the alternatives, if you believe that you have the answers, and if you also believe that you are not a typical political party, because people do not vote for typical political parties. I tell you now, no one is going to vote for a political party that is opportunistic. We can smell opportunism from a mile away. That is one way that you can do it. What did the Constitutional Court say 1 month ago? Massive constitutional judgment that said independent people can now run for office. If Luyanda feels that he has the potential, if Busi feels she has the potential and she has a constituency, I'm going to support her. Do not tell me that the 20 million that voted or that didn't vote is not going to vote for Busi. The only reason why they didn't vote is because they don't like the menu. They do not like what is on the buffet. And so if Busi brings an alternative that people like, there's a good chance that Busi and her friends with all these brilliant ideas might go straight to Parliament. That is a way. The second way is legislation. Where are you? I mean, I'm 35 years old. During COVID, I had to sit with your national youth policy that is now currently being reviewed in Parliament. Why didn't you give inputs on that national youth policy? Why are you not giving inputs on the legislation that is going before Parliament? Why are you not writing petitions to Parliament saying that you have issues with X, Y, and Z? Why are you not marching and protesting up and down the whole day, making the life of government so not uncontrollable? What is the right word? So, I mean, inconvenient for these people that they are forced to listen to you. Currently, you're not giving them. This is a walk in the park. This is like just, them going to Parliament, doing their job. No, the citizens won't disturb because they actually don't care. They actually don't have an opinion, but you do have an opinion. Input on the legislation. Become involved within that space. The last area that I can also look at is civically. That is where I am now. I'm mobilizing the masses on the ground. I'm educating my people on the Constitution. I'm telling them exactly what the roles and the function of the state is. I'm explaining exactly how the process works. So we need to get involved in our communities. Whatever education you have, share the education with your gogo. Share it with your aunt. Make them educated in terms of how these things work so that they can ask the right questions at the community meetings and torture the councillor when they come there with their half-baked potatoes in terms of how they spend the ward money. That is what we need to do. And that is the kind of youth that I expect needs to emerge from this space now. And I believe there's potential. I believe there's a gap for us. We're going to take this gap. We're going to run all the way.
Thank you very, very much for those remarks. I can see you're very passionate about the topic. So in the comments, we had a question from Candy. I don't know if Candy Sika, I don't know if she'd wanna still ask the question or if she's answered. You can kindly switch on your mic and just ask your question.
Hi.
Oh, Candy's here. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Hi. I have questions. So about success, right? And the culture of success, I feel like Black people don't really have their own culture of what success is. Because asking me, if you ask me as a university student what success is, I'll tell you that success is me making it and fitting in with the white people and leaving my Black people behind, or leaving my Black females behind. So how do we, because it's normalized, how do we move from not normalizing leaving our Black people behind and actually doing what Luyanda was saying about, making a way for somebody who comes after you? Because when Black people, what I think is that when Black people get to those positions, when they actually get to fit in with the white people or whatever, they are so scared to lose their bread and lose the money that they have worked so hard for, that speaking for our Black people or trying to represent Black people within those spaces is very costly for them. How do we really make it normal for Black people to stand up for each other in a way that, doesn't compromise the 2 cents that they're getting, which is not even enough to begin with? And to Thando, I would really like to ask Thando, what do you have to say for that kid sitting next to you, let's say under normal circumstances, in the lecture hall saying, that Black person, just be happy that my father puts food on your table and pays for your tuition? What do you have to say for that? And that mindset, do you think that also this being a Black people and a woman's race is one of the reasons why we're not able to fill the gap or pick up on the slack? What are the things that we are neglecting? Is division as huge as it is one of the things why we cannot go anywhere, or it looks like we're just talking and nothing is happening? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the question, Candy. Can we hear Busi's remarks on what Candy has said? And then the question posed to Thando as well. Can you please answer that, Thando?
Could you just rephrase it for me quickly? ABASA team?
Oh, Candy said a mouthful. Could you please just shorten the question and just get straight to the point, Candy, please?
Okay, how do Black people come up with their own definition of success instead of it being fitting in with the white kids, it's fitting in, and just being the Black women, as Sihle said, in the court, the boardroom or whatever? How do we come up with our own definition of success in a way that includes those we have left behind?
Cool. Okay. So it's a difficult one. And I think everyone has a unique response to that. Before I even get into my response, I just want to say here to Melene. Many of the things you said are on point, and I completely agree with. Listen, Candy, I think what happens usually in a country like ours, where you've got a history of racial inequality and discrimination, is that you have this burgeoning middle class, and you've got institutions that create some kind of assimilation between Black kids and colored kids and Indian kids, assimilating into a white normative culture and a white framework, mostly in school, progressing into tertiary, and then later on the workplace. And then later on in your life, there's this confusion about who am I, what are my values, how do I measure success? Because there's been this assimilation on a continuum happening, you know, since you're in preschool, if you're middle class, for instance. And then if you're not middle class and you're coming from a more disadvantaged background, and usually only getting your first what you call interaction with white people in particular at a work level, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're corporate, then it becomes even more difficult, because you haven't built the muscle, you know, in terms of how to jump the hoops like kids who would have engaged that kind of system since they were young. But I always think that there are certain things that are immovables, regardless of the race or the culture or the generation you come from. Excellence, accountability, respect, there's certain things that are immovables that you can pursue from whichever point of view, and that should be the only things that matter to you in terms of how you measure yourself as a successful individual. But more than that, I have always said to any Black folk that I engage with, that you've got to be really, really, you can't be naive about our situation, because when that happens, you forego some of the very important things that constitute success as an individual, but that can also push the stick ahead for us as a race, or for women as a gender. And the first thing is something that Melene really highlighted, which is that you need to sort out your moral framework as an individual, first and foremost. What do you believe about people? Do you believe that skin color and gender and cultural difference constitutes to a difference in intelligence and accountability and what someone brings to the table? If you believe those things and don't account for them or question them at a young enough age, then you bring those prejudices into any area that you're going to occupy. And if you're in a leadership position or position of power, then that's going to cause problems for so many people. So this conversation is futile if you yourself haven't interrogated your own moral framework. Secondly, you need to make the most of every opportunity. Michelle Obama says in her book, Becoming, it hurts that you have to do double the work as a white kid living in a suburban area somewhere with parents who have good paying jobs and have an inheritance. But it is true, there's no escaping it, right? If you have the opportunity to go to school, take school seriously. If you have the opportunity to get a degree and earn money and be in a job, take it seriously, show up and put your best foot forward. If you have the opportunity to own property and have a good credit record and weather storms so you can pass down wealth to your children, take those opportunities. It's really important because you're one of the few who have those opportunities. But if you have bigger opportunities, agenda driving opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, then you have to even do double the work. You have to take it double seriously. You have to ask yourself what you believe about people's earning. Are you paying the staff who clean in your office properly? Do you believe that maternity leave is essential? Are you paying the UIF of your staff members and all their contribution from their salaries? So if you have agenda driving power, and you don't take your responsibility seriously, you're creating another 100 years of suffering for families that you could have literally changed outcomes for. So it's four things. You have to sort out your moral framework. You have to make the most of your opportunities. You have to make sure that you do double the work if you've got big opportunities. And finally, you have to stay ahead of the curve. Don't be naive. The Bible itself says you have to be as shrewd as a serpent, even though you as innocent as a dove in most instances. You have to honestly face the reality of the country we live in, the workplaces we go into, the institutions we study at, and be real. arm yourself with knowledge to protect yourself, be real about the world we live in. So that's for me is like the most important things you have to keep in mind.
Thank you so much for that. Tando Jiyane, you also had a question. I don't know if you still remember it, or do
Can
you
she
want Candy
please,
to?
please, can she just rephrase?
Candy, could you please rephrase the question that you had for Tando? And then after this, I have one question for Busi, and then I think we're gonna ask for closing remarks from her because she has to leave in like a few minutes.
Okay, so for Tando, I was asking, what do you have to say for that kid sitting next to you in the lecture hall saying that, Black person, just be happy that my father puts food on your table and pays for your tuition? And do you think that, because I feel like one of the reasons why we're still having conversations like this is because it's a Black people struggle. It's a female struggle. How do we make it everybody's problem? Or is it that the comforts of being on the bright side are so amazing that nowhere on earth would I want to give this away? Like, what do you have to say about that?
Thank you for the question, Candy. You see, I think Luyanda mentioned, right, that there's a lot of unlearning to do and learning, right? So for one, not every Black person is Black conscious, right? So it's our duty to continuously teach other Black people that, hey, there's an issue, right? That's number one. And then our struggles aren't the same, obviously. We can't, okay, well, our parents maybe or grandparents had the issue of apartheid, right? But we are fighting a different battle, right? So we have to get that one straight also, that, okay, hey, let's teach each other. And in teaching, we are unifying the whole Black culture in a sense, like we're uniting, because here's the thing, Black people aren't united. That's just facts, and that's why we're still here today. So thing is, you have to know, right, as a Black person, it's not just about me. I'm fighting for other people. Think of the people in the rural areas that are gonna encounter those problems if you don't act upon it. So number one, because not everybody knows about this issue, you let them know, hey, dude, this is what's up. Do something about it. It starts with you now. Learn, and teach other people. Continuously learning, you teach other people. It's gonna get to a point, like Luyanda said, if it's worth fighting for, you continuously do that. You do it until it's recognized. Would say, hey, this is actually an issue. See how I feel like the only reason why it's not taken seriously is because we're not also, maybe as the youth, we're not radical enough. Like, we should be making moves like, hey, this is an issue. You see, it's a pandemic, as is inequality is a pandemic, gender-based violence is a pandemic, racism is a pandemic. But we as young people also should take the stand. We would say, Yazin, guys, let's do something about it. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tando, for that. So we have one question from Busi directed to Busi. I'm just going to read the question, and then can you please have Busi answer the question? It says, what do you think can be done to start entrepreneurial spaces equal for women and Black people, since there are no HR structures for the entire ecosystem?
Yeah. Is that a question from Sipo?
From Letis, yes.
Fantastic. It's interesting. Sipo's actually my mentee, and I've known him since he was in grade 10, and is now like Sipo's second year at Wits now, doing an accounting science degree. And and he's just an A student. So I'm just really proud of you, and thank you for being on the call. We've actually never had this conversation between him and I, the issue of how do we consolidate and create change within the startup and entrepreneurship space, because it's you know, there aren't bodies. I mean, we all know each other on LinkedIn, and we follow each other on Instagram, and we meet each other at Bry's now and again, but it's not consolidated as well as it should to deal with the kind of issues we face. I think there was an event I did last year in November called the Startup State of the Nation address. And the idea behind that was to create a community of entrepreneurs and stakeholders who have a influence and impact in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in South Africa to get together once a year to dissect issues in response to the State of the Nation address. And although there were a few errors in terms of how it was managed, I think the concept was profound. And what it was able to achieve kind of showed me the direction that I think we need to take as a community. For starters, we need to create some kind of database or organization, an ABASA BMF style organization that's strictly looking at Black entrepreneurs and Black startups and the issues that we face as a collective. I'm not sure who's going to champion it. It's still something that I think of. I'm tired of being an activist. It's painful. It doesn't pay bills, but we need to do it. And based on the momentum from conversations like this, I think those things will start to become clear. But when we've created those bodies, it then becomes important for us to create some kind of strategic block as a group. And it's something we're not doing. So I can name like 10 entrepreneurs who are close friends who are doing really well. I can't tell you how that directly impacts me and my success. And that's a shame, because it's not the same for white people or the Jewish community, or I think even the Muslim community get it too. That I can have 5 to 10 successful, thriving entrepreneur friends or leaders of startups, but not directly feel the impact of that in my own life is indicative of just the lack of progress that we've made as a block. So we need to change our mindset with regards to that. I have no answers as to how we're going to do it. But certainly, I think as individual entrepreneurs, what we can do for now, as we start to reflect on how we create a community, is that we can start in our own businesses to practice empowering strategies. Like I said, you have to look at how do you pay people? How do you remunerate people for their work? A lot of entrepreneurs, the first thing they did when COVID happened, regardless of how it affected their businesses, they cut back on paying their staff salaries, which is indicative of how much they value people and of the fact that we might not be doing anything different from corporate or exploitative MNCs. We're simply, doing it on our own terms. So just because we're entrepreneurs doesn't mean we're doing anything revolutionary. We have to look at the practices that we're using to lead our companies and grow them. And if those practices don't build empathy and accountability into them, then we're not shifting the dialogue. All we're doing is complaining because maybe we're not the ones getting the tenders. And that's a problem. And I think finally, the most important thing that we could do is that we need to pass the ball, man. I love soccer so much and I grew up watching it. And it's just been coming back into my life now for some reason. But I realized that what I really profoundly loved about it is that passing the ball to score thing. There's no one hero who moves it from one end to the other. And I don't think we understand that as entrepreneurs. Is there a network I have that can open the door for Sihle's Bolani's business? Does Sihle Bolani have a connection that could help me fast track something I'm trying to do in XYZ sector? At the end of this conversation, can I reach out to Khaya and say, hey, Khaya, we just had a conversation and I realized that you know this person, could you introduce me to them? And will he do that? We still haven't even gotten through that stage. Do you know what I mean? So we need to get over the whole like, oh, there's scarcity, so I need to make money and I don't care who else makes money. We need to get past that, and then we need to look at how we're running our own organizations
And ultimately, we need to create some kind of body that is similar to what ABASA and BMF are doing, that's going to really champion our views and our contribution to the growth of this country.
Can I just say that if you did have to ask Khaya for any assistance in terms of getting to put you into contact with someone, he would definitely help you. I can see he's very quiet for some reason, but yeah, he's definitely one guy. I think that's why a lot of the students, and particularly I admire him, is one person who does not hold back in terms of opening up opportunities for a lot of people. And I think just taking back from what you're saying, Busi, is that that's just one of the things that we can do. In our own spaces, I think we have certain connections that the next person may benefit from. Yeah, so wherever we can, I think we should always try in our networks, in our little networks, in our little ecosystems, to try to definitely, you know, what do they say, lift as we rise, you know, and never close doors, you know. I mean, there's enough, I think, for all of us to eat. There's this whole mentality that, you know, as Black people, you know, you want to be the only Black in the room. But yeah, I think there's enough for everybody. And I think as ABASA, as organizations, as we are now, whatever opportunities that we know, we need to share them with everyone so that we can all benefit and move forward. I just wanted to put that comment there.
Just quickly on that point you just made, and I mean, I'll definitely open this up to the broader ABASA team as well. I'd be very happy to get into a conversation about putting together some kind of startup or entrepreneur conversation where we can really get into depth about the deeper issues within the ecosystem, just beyond the political issues and like scarcity and all of that. Also just have a crisis of the quality of the solutions we're coming up with. I don't think it's an entitlement issue necessarily, but there's an issue. We don't truly understand what solutions are needed and solutions can create change and can be grown to reach scale. There's a business revolution happening in Africa and Black people are missing out on it, which is ironic because it's our continent. But I'd be very happy if, you know, we could create some kind of conversation post this to talk about how do we plug into the right sectors, the right acceleration programs, so that the ideas we have actualize into real ideas. But when that's done, Khaya, you have to give us connections, okay? And contacts.
Luyanda is my contact.
Welcome back, Khaya. You've been quiet for a very long time, man.
No, Phil, I'm an observer today. But I think just before I log off, because unfortunately I have to be on air at 8 p.m., I do think that, you know, the type of conversations that we've initiated today are very cathartic in nature. And when I say they're very cathartic, is that a lot of us have got all these pent-up frustrations based on the fact that we thought we were the only ones that had these types of issues. And I think when we then in a platform of this nature, when you then hear that actually somebody else has had a similar experience, it at least enables us to know that I'm not alone. So it actually facilitates people reaching out and then being able to say, well, actually, perhaps I can be assisted, I can be helped. So I think it's very important for us to really revisit these conversations and even find a way of creating platforms for people to be able to reach out and find assistance rather than being alienated, because it's that alienation that actually leaves us all worse off. Thank you very much.
We have a last question. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'm just going to ask all of the panelists to give their closing remarks. This question is from Sihle.
Okay. I think I see the question regarding the lack of representation in the upper level management, lack of a pipeline for such individuals of color. Look, you know, I saw this question earlier, and I honestly do not believe that in a country whereby the majority are Black, are people of color, to say that there's a lack of a pipeline of people to then occupy the spaces of management. For me, if you had to believe that narrative, then you can believe anything. Because a lot of the times, if you look at people who occupy positions of power, I mean, there's a lot of nepotism. There's a lot of, depending on where you went to school, depending on who your father's friends with, depending on which golf estates you have membership to, golf clubs you have membership to. That's literally how certain opportunities, especially from an executive management perspective, those are how those opportunities open up. It has nothing to do with talent, has nothing to do with experience. This is purely my opinion, but it has everything to do with your network. And I think as ABASA, as different organizations, one of the things is trying to level the playing fields. And the reasons why we have affirmative action, employment equity, all these kind of things is to say that we see that, I mean, if we don't have these kind of laws and policies in place, we will never get a chance to be actually in those roles, because it's easier for me to hire a friend of mine or to hire a friend of mine's son who went to the same school as my son went to and give them an opportunity because it's familiar. And it is definitely, I think, to answer your question, Letizia, I would not agree that there's not a pipeline. It's just that there's not a willingness to give certain people opportunities. And I don't want to just limit that to white people or to corporates and organizations. I mean, we often hear the term about cater deployments in terms of the political circles. So a lot of those, I mean, I've seen it personally in terms of the government structures. I mean, a lot of those senior positions have it, although you may go through an HR process whereby people are getting interviewed and you get asked questions, it literally has little to do. I think your skill and expertise counts for about 40%, but your network and who you're friends with and who you're politically affiliated with counts for the majority, honestly. And that's the way it is. And I think we, as a people, in our different roles, those are the kind of things that we need to speak against or speak up against. Is to say that, look, I mean, if I'm as qualified, if I believe that I've got the expertise, why am I not being considered for those kind of positions? I hope I've answered that question. But yeah, I think the other panelists can also give it a go. Oh, but by the way, just I think there's a person here who's getting angry that we're not asking them questions. As a Tato, who asked to take answer how do these questions. So if you can please, before we get a stampede of students, can we consider at least one of his? I assume it's a he. One of their questions before we close. Thank you.
Tato, please ask the question.
Greetings, guys. The question I wanted to ask is that, how do we shape the accounting degree towards accelerating emancipation? I don't know if it's clear.
Why specifically the accounting degree, if I may ask, Tato?
Well, I believe ABASA is founded mostly in the accounting department or the accounting field, right? And given the knowledge I have about the accounting degree and all of those kind of things, the accounting degree is more capitalistic in nature. In other words, it's more about profits, numbers, and all of those kind of things. So when we look at the engineering degree, there are modules that are inserted in first year, modules like sociology and all of those kind of modules, which are not directly related to being an engineer and all those kind of things, but they are there for, what do I call it? Emancipation in a way, mental liberation, to teach us about power in society and all of those kind of things. But then it is something that is not there in the accounting degree. From first year till the last, you are just taught about businesses and all of those kind of things. But then when coming to the liberation of a Black person's mind, or the psychological emancipation and all of those kind of things, the accounting degree plays a very little role. If we can just put it maybe blatantly, it plays no role. It plays no role, absolutely. So when we're having ABASA hosting a topic about emancipation and all of those kind of things, but then the accounting degree itself in the School of Accountancy at large, let me just put it, the School of Accountancy, because I believe that in the Wits School of Accountancy, there's no module that relates with sociology on all of those kind of things, international relations, those are kind of things. They are not there. So, and those are fundamental things to emancipation, because they teach about what is Ubuntu, what is, those kind of philosophies and all of those kind of things that build up to the emancipation of a Black man's psychological state. Yeah, I submit.
Lucy, do you want to take that on?
Look, I mean, I did accounting for 1 year, so I'm hardly in the loop about where the accounting profession is right now and the kind of issues that accountants deal with and upcoming accountants. But I can tell you that I left the accounting degree for BCom PPE for precisely the concerns that were just raised in this question. So I understood the question from the bat when it was asked. I went to a BCom PPE degree because in my mind, I was looking at the way AI and digitization are being fast-tracked and how that's going to, at some point, obliterate most accounting jobs. And just the space for me felt really thin because the jobs that are going to really stand out in the future, or the jobs that are going to survive AI and digitization, are jobs that have a human face and jobs that can't be necessarily, there's a good way to think about it. If a job is repetitive enough that I can develop an algorithm, then that job is going to be wiped out by AI digitization in a couple of years. And so accountants just need to also be real about how that's going to affect the profession and what burden that places on them to learn skills that complement accounting, but are not necessarily as, algorithm and repetitive and computer-based. Accounting really felt, accounting can be computerized is what I'm saying, can be automated, can be digitized. And I think that's both a threat, but it's also an opportunity for people. Like, I'm not sure who asked the question now. I wish I was referring to you directly, but I think it's a huge opportunity for you to hone in on the human and critical skills that are inherently human and that can't be automated and digitized and replicated by technologies. Critical thinking, creative problem solving, communication, collaboration, citizenship, civic engagement and awareness. Those are all skills that are missing in the accounting degree. And it's a shame, to be honest, because in 20 years time, 20 years is a long time, in fact, 10, 15 years, it's the skills that are going to keep you in the accounting industry. I would definitely say, think about signing up to extracurricular societies that can add value to you. And if you're doing well academically, think about taking on additional courses, even if it's not for credits, courses in the BA degree that could add value to you. Sociology is a really good start. You could also do a philosophy degree, a philosophy course here and there. But apart from that, like, really get involved in leadership in ABASA, for instance, because it teaches you valuable skills that you definitely won't be learning in an accounting degree. Join societies that just push you to think more about different things. I think that's going to be the most important things, because just doing accounting and getting 90s in it is not going to be enough in 10 years' time. It's just not. And Tato, thank you so much for that question. And I hope everyone on this conversation of studying accounting takes it seriously, because accounting is really under threat.
Can you please just give Sihle to just give her closing remarks, because she has to go off the call just now. Please. Thank you.
Okay, hi. So I think, we've covered pretty much most of anything that we can possibly cover in this conversation. I think it's been a really amazing engagement, and I'm happy that I was able to be a part of it and to also just hear some of the burning questions that are on the minds of the young people, that are going to be, that have either just entered the workforce or that are coming into the workforce. I think the one thing is that I'm very hopeful about the future, because of just the the quality of the questions and the interrogation that's taking place. But one of the things that's always very important for me is that, you know, it's all good and well to have a conversation. It's all good and well to attend a webinar. It's all good and well to send through questions. What happens when you log off? You know, what change do you implement going forward so that the next time you come together, you're having a different kind of conversation. There's some progress that's been made. And, you know, because we have to get to a point where our events have got to be beyond just events. It's got to be beyond just talking heads. What's more important is, what do you take from this conversation and how do you apply it to the various contexts that you find yourself in? And how does that then begin to, you know, contribute towards a different narrative, a different reality, a different experience for you and for other Black professionals, whether it's, you know, within university or whether it's within the workplace. There's got to be an impact. There's got to be a difference, because if you're attending all of these talks and you're having these conversations, but it's not changing anything, if you're not, you know, questioning more, you know, the things that you're doing, if you're not changing the way in which you approach certain conversations or certain people, if you're not changing your thought processes and evolving those, then there's really no point in being part of these sessions, because then you're just, you know, somewhere wasting your time and your data. So I think it's really important to really reflect, you know, at the end of the session about everything that was discussed, how you feel about everything that was discussed, but also then what does that mean for you and how can you then take this agenda and push it forward. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Sihle, for joining in, and thank you for your closing remarks. I feel like you made a very strong point, because it's beyond just being here and talking about this. How are we going to, like, what's the action going forward? What action are we taking going forward? So thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand over to Melene, because she also has to leave the call very soon. So, yeah.
I think Sihle has also mentioned, I mean, everything. That was just a brilliant closing. But I would just like to thank ABASA leadership for, again, the invitation to be here with all of you. I really hope that you have membership for people over 35, or, you know, the day I retire, that I can join this movement, because really I felt very excluded at UWC. But anyways, be that as it may. This was fantastic. We learned a lot. We discussed so much. I hope that Frans and the leaders will take this further, that there will be more engagements, that I'll come out from the Republic of Cape Town and come to Johannesburg and come and meet you face to face. So we can have a whole day discussion around various topics and so forth. And I'm willing to avail myself for that. Obviously, and the only thing is I don't want money, I just want membership. And then I really hope that you didn't come here just for a sermon. You know, there's not a sermon for you to feel good about yourself and to vent, and that you go to the Anglican church and you talk about, you give your confessions and then they give you the pardon and you go away. It doesn't work that way. We are sitting in serious trouble in South Africa. Our unemployment is skyrocketed. Our social welfare is going down the drain. Corruption is at an all-time high. Listen, guys, I'm serious. We are in deep, 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 deep trouble. Deep trouble. And we need young people like yourself to really become active and participatory citizens in this country and to effect change. So I'm going to rely on you. And hopefully the next time I see your face, before I come to Joburg, I might see your face on the ballot for next year's local government elections, and I might even vote for you. So be confident, be courageous, be the young lions that you are. Go out there, claim your country, and take over what you need to. Okay? All of the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the vote of confidence as well. We'll definitely make you proud. I just like the rest of the panelists to have their closing remarks as we're about to end off. We're a bit over time, but I mean, it's a heated conversation. It was meant to happen.
Busi, you can go.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I think just from my point of view, thank you very much to the ABASA team for inviting me to be part of this panel. These kind of societies are really important to me, and I was very active when I was at UCT in, I think ORCA, as well as BMF. So it's just really inspiring to see that there are intelligent, articulate students taking the baton forward and making sure that there's a plethora of resources and mentorship and networks that their peers can access. And I just really want to commend all of you for the work that you're doing, but also for being on the call. The chat room was, I deactivated Twitter a while back, I think 4 months ago. The chat room was the closest thing I've experienced in a while to Twitter, and I really enjoyed it. It was just, I feel FOMO literally as I'm thinking about exiting the call. The conversations we had are important, but I also want to echo what was said by my previous panelists, that this can't be something that stops here. There are so many things that are that haven't been answered in the chat room, and you have to go find the answers. I always tell people looking for mentorship on social media that virtual mentorship is very important. Don't give up on a relationship just because someone gives you the time. Follow them on Instagram, follow them on Twitter, follow them on Facebook, read up on their posts, check up on what they're doing on LinkedIn, research about their business and or their professional growth and their career trajectory, because arming yourself with all of that is your follow through. So don't leave here with unanswered questions and just bury them, but actually go and investigate. You know, there's someone who said we need to talk more in depth about this issue of how AI and digitization is going to affect a lot of people in the accounting industry. And it hasn't been answered in this chat. It probably won't be, you know, because of just looking at the time. Go and research it yourself. There's a plethora of resources and articles online. But in closing, I just want to make sure that every young person on this conversation knows and understands that when one system of oppression ends, in as much as it is an opportunity for us to go forward, you also have to be very much aware that it's an opportunity for a new system of oppression to be created to close that void. And when we, as victims of that oppression, are not alert, when we're not united, when we're not dealing with the issues as soon as they rear their head, then that void will be filled by another system of oppression that's dressed in a different suit, or dressed in a different this and that, and we're not even gonna see it coming. Colonialism went and long came apartheid, and they said, hey, but we're not killing people senselessly in their communities, but they were in different ways. And then when that ended, we were like, here's relief, and then institutional biases came into the part, and now you can't get housing and access to this and access to that. So you need to stay woke. And with every single win, you need to think about potentially what stumbling blocks are being created 5, 6, 7 years ahead of the wins that you're making, so you can avoid them. Stay woke, guys. It's really important. And thank you so much again for inviting me. I hope I've made some impact, and hopefully we can have the entrepreneurship conversation, because that's really my first passion.
Thank you so much also for like bringing up the entrepreneurship conversation. We're so excited because we like been chatting on the group chat and everybody's like, did you guys note that? Did you guys note that Ubusi is really up for this? So thank you very, very much for joining us. We really value your inputs, your opinions. It's been very great. Thank you very, very much. Bye. Okay, Mr. Gidini.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, ABASA Wits team. I think I learned quite a lot in terms of what emancipation means, and well done in terms of the panel. I think we had some really strong women representing this discussion, leading the discussion. I hope I was able to add some bit of value. But yeah, I think looking forward to tomorrow's event also, where it's going to be an all-women panel. And I think if I can say anything from a ABASA leadership, I think I would love to see more of these kind of conversations going on, more women taking up space, because clearly women have a lot to say, and it's very relevant in terms of the points that are raising. I thoroughly enjoyed the engagements, and I just would like to just close off. There was a quote that I made reference to earlier about Rudyard Kipling. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much. If you can fill the unforgiving minutes with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. I'd just like to close off on that tip in terms of just emancipating ourselves. Yeah, and thank you so much for this conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Look forward to the next conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your opinions. We'll hand over to Thando, our last panelist, to give her closing remarks.
I'd just like to thank the ABASA Wits family for supporting the potential, right? And to get this opportunity to be surrounded by such greatness. I appreciate it a lot. I think they've covered everything, almost everything really. It doesn't stop here. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of emancipation still to be done. It doesn't stop with the conversation. We have to do this. Nobody must get discouraged as Black people, as young people, especially because the future lies in us. We are the future. So I just think that it doesn't have to stop now. Let's make the change that we would like to see. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Keleto to do the closing.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Keleto Khanakhomo, and I'm part of ABASA Wits. It is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks to everyone. I think we would heartily like to propose the vote of thanks to all the panelists for being in this conversation with us. It is important for us as students to understand exactly what is it that is going on in our country, and for you to join us, it shows that you understand that it is important for us to know that, as we are the future generation. And I would also like to thank all the viewers who joined us today. Had it not been for you, we would have not had this conversation. It was important for you to be here, and we appreciate the data that you have wasted and the time that you have wasted being part of this conversation. I would like to be short since we ran out of time, so I will not say much since all the panelists are not here, most of them. I think Mr. Luyanda is still here. But we appreciate the time that you've took out of your busy schedules to join us today, and we hope that next time when we invite you, you will still join us. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you, Keleto. Thank you to everyone who joined in. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Mr. Gidini. Thank you, Sis Linda. Thank you to Joburg Branch. Thank you everyone who was here. ABASA Unizulu, everybody who made the comments, the questions. It was indeed a heated conversation. Thank you very much, guys. I feel like everything is set.